To get started on our Fairfax County Public School Board Return to School work session. I would first like to take attendance to make sure that all of our board members are here and have audio that's working. Dr. Anderson. Ms. Cohen.
Here.
Thank you. Ms. Corbett-Sanders.
Good afternoon.
Ms. Dearnett Kofax.
I'm here. Good afternoon.
Thank you. And Mr. Frisch.
Hello.
I believe Ms. Keys Gamara is away from the table. Ms. McLaughlin.
I'm here.
Hi there. Ms. Marin.
Hello.
Ms. Amash.
Here.
Ms. Pekarsky. And Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
I'm here.
And Dr. Anderson, we see you've joined us. Thank you, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser. Ms. Pekarsky. Here she comes. She's joining right now.
I'm here. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, so today is our long-awaited monthly work session on return to school. And there are a number of documents that are available to the public out on board docs. Thank you very much to staff for preparing these and putting those out there. There's a set of surveys and the results, the parent and student surveys that were done. We have a description of things that we've done to support students over the past year and looking forward into next quarter and into the summer. There is, of course, the return to school presentation that we'll be seeing today, and there's a narrative report that goes with the presentation. And also some results from an internal study that was done on teaching and learning during the time of the COVID pandemic. So please take a look at all of those reports. And again, thank you to staff for preparing all of that. We will be talking today about, here we are in this week, March 16th, where we are welcoming our last group of students back into our schools for hybrid learning. So where are we going from here the rest of the spring, this summer, and of course, as we've had lots of conversation about, what will be happening in the fall. So we look forward to hearing staff updates on all of that. We will hear the staff presentation, and then we will do kind of our usual work session formats where each board member will have 3 minutes for comments and questions. And then we will have go backs of 2 minutes. So Dr. Brabrand, if you would like to introduce the presentation and get started, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tolan. Good to see you this afternoon and all school board members. Welcome. This is our monthly return to school update, and really thrilled to be here. I'm going to see if our school board office can put up the presentation, and we'll go ahead and get started. But I am proud to report to you that FCPS is returning strong as we return our last group of students for in-person learning this week, our 3rd through 6th graders. And we will be presenting today all of the information around our return to school, not just for this year and 4th quarter, but also looking to the summer and to the fall. Over a year ago today, we all felt the impacts of COVID as the Commonwealth reported its first case and the governor declared a state of emergency in our school buildings. None of us could have predicted the impact that COVID would have at the time. Many of us anticipated it would just be 2 weeks and a quick return to normalcy. This year has been a difficult year, perhaps the most difficult year in public education in a generation for our students, for our community, for humanity. But there is hope today. Today, as I shared, we successfully welcomed back our 3rd through 6th graders, our final cohort of students who are returning to school for in-person learning. and we have had a tremendous success in returning our students to in-person instruction over this past month. Our teachers, our principals, custodians, bus drivers, support staff, our entire school and central office have worked long and hard hours over the weekends, at nights, again and again over these last several months to make these last few weeks be filled with joy, excitement, and relief as our community begins to emerge from this pandemic. You know, I've been in schools. I know this school board has been in schools, and our leadership team members in schools, being able to witness firsthand all of the wonderful activities that are happening as students return. And we want to take a moment to share some of our first day back stories as we've returned over 99,000 staff and students to in-person learning as of today, and over 109,000 staff and students as of this coming Thursday. So if we can go to the next slide and watch this wonderful video from our folks here in FCPS.
We had a long time where there's no kids, so it's got really quiet in here.
Feels so great to be back to normal, have some sort of normal back in our lives.
And what the students have told me is that they just feel happy to be in a school. They feel happy to see people, to see their friends.
They love being here. They love being with their teachers, and it's wonderful to hear that.
Everybody's excited and faces smiling, even though you can't really see them, but we're excited.
I actually made a new friend.
Really glad to be back in school because you can build connections.
The best energy as a teacher is when I'm in a building, in a room, working with students directly.
So to have them back and see their smiling faces just shows me that we do make a difference to them and that they enjoy coming here and learning every day.
The children to me have been my light. They have been what's kept me grounded during this, and seeing them and how excited they are is what's really keeping me going.
I never thought I'd miss so many people.
So I want to thank our wonderful staff and OCCR for putting together that video that represents the countless stories in Fairfax County Public Schools as we are returning to school in person. And again, I want to thank all of our students, staff, our family, school board, and our county partners that have made this such a success. It would not have been possible without all of our stakeholders coming together to make this happen. We know, though, that returning in person to in-person instruction has not been without challenges. Schools look different. There have been adjustments, necessary adjustments for students and staff alike, as we make sure safety is our primary responsibility. Just as our schools have adjusted, we are reviewing all of those protocols to ensure that our students have the best experience possible and the safest experience possible as well. I want all of you to know in this community that Fairfax County Public Schools are safe. As students and staff have returned to in-person learning, our data shows, and you'll see it later in the presentation today, that our mitigation measures are working. and that COVID transmission in our schools is minimal. We're also optimistic about the declining COVID rates in our community. The news that Virginia is on pace to have all adults vaccinated by this summer, and the growing body of research around COVID to inform schools in making decisions about social distancing requirements in schools, especially as COVID transmission declines. For these reasons, I'm happy to share with you that Fairfax County Public Schools will be returning 5 days of in-person learning this fall. And we are going to continue to use the experience here in this fourth and final quarter of our school year to inform being successful to have everyone back in our schools 5 days a week this fall. A lot of that is through the great work of our health and safety team, and our leader in that work has been Dr. Boyd, Dr. Michelle Boyd, and I just want to thank her and her team as we turn it over to her for health and safety updates for all they have done to work with all of our stakeholders inside our schools and outside our schools to make our return to school so successful and so safe. Dr. Boyd.
Thank you, Dr. Brand. And as Dr. Brand shared, we are extremely excited to share that we have had minimal transmission in our schools, and we know that that's reflective of the great work of our students, our staff, and our families in supporting and uplifting the mitigation strategies. As you can see on the slide here, we have had almost no transmission in our schools, almost no transmission in our schools. And of the cases, overall cases that we've had in our schools, that's been extremely small, as represented by a 0.2% of our students and our staff reporting that they have been COVID positive. In addition to our celebration regarding the low positivity in our schools, we're excited to also share that our community transmission in Fairfax County has been a decline as well, as represented by the number of cases per 100,000 that's been on a downward trend since January 16th, 2021. While Fairfax remains in the high risk level based on the number of cases per 100,000 persons for the past 7 days, with 102.5 cases, we are approaching the substantial risk level, which is a lower risk, represented by 50 to 100 cases in a locality over the past 7 days. You will note that the time frame as referenced in the above aforementioned data is regarding 7 days instead of 14 days. This change is as a result of the updated guidance released from CDC on February 12th that recommends the use of a 7-day time frame for community transmission and 4 risk levels instead of 14 days and 5 risk days as provided in their earlier guidance. In addition to our excitement about our mitigation strategies, we're also excited to share that we have had the opportunity to have an overwhelming majority of our employees of Fairfax County Public Schools to be vaccinated. We are extremely grateful for the partnership of the Fairfax County Health Department and ANOVA in standing up a vaccination clinic for educators in Fairfax County, and we want to give a special huge thank you from FCPS schools in supporting our efforts to return safely in school. While there are a few persons who are still waiting to get their vaccinations, we're supporting those persons in collaboration with our partners, as well as a number of our staff have now wanted to seek out vaccinations who previously did not want to. So we're supporting their efforts, and we're just extremely appreciative for the partnership and support in returning safely to school. While we're extremely excited about the downward trend in our community transmission and about our ability to have vaccination for all of our employees, we are continue to have the utmost importance and the need to be vigilant with the implementation of 5 key mitigation strategies as emphasized by the Fairfax County Health Department and the CDC. And so as you can see on your screen, and we share every time we talk, again, because they're so important, we will continue to emphasize and promote the consistent and correct use of masks, social distancing to the greatest extent possible, hand hygiene and respiratory etiquette. And I think you saw some of our youngsters doing just that in the video. cleaning and disinfecting. And again, our video shows you a glimpse of that work that is being done by our employees to support a healthy environment for students and staff. And we continue to partner with the health department around contact tracing and the investigation process. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Leedy Ruda, Director of Research and Strategic Improvement, who will discuss some key findings from our ongoing distance learning survey.
Thank you, Dr. Boyd. The Office of Research and Strategic Improvement, or ORSI as it's called, has been conducting a study of teaching and learning since the COVID pandemic began a year ago. And the focus of this study has been on examining how distance learning was progressing, and as we've expanded to have our students return, has also expanded to include in-person instruction and concurrent instruction. The primary work is really to see what ways teaching and learning, our students and our staff, may have been impacted by the context of the COVID pandemic, as well as issues around academics, teaching, and learning. The information that I'm going to share today comes from our just released second study report that looks at teaching and learning in the first half of the current school year. And the full study report is attached to today's agenda item for anyone who wants to see more details. Now, this report follows two prior reports. The first was a study report last spring that supported improvements for the current school year. And then there was also an analytic report released in this past November 2020 that examined the first quarter marks of FCPS's middle and high school students. And that marks report in particular from earlier in the school year found that there were meaningful increases in the number of D and F marks for middle and high school students, especially among our English learners and our students with disabilities. Now, this slide that we're looking at shows that for quarter two, we've seen improved marks for our middle and high school students. When you look at the column chart on the left, which shows the quarter two marks for this year, in the very last column of that chart, you see that overall 20% of all our middle and high school students are receiving all A's or higher in quarter two, and 33% are receiving all B's or higher. And that means that the majority of students were receiving all A's or B's at quarter two here in FCPS. Now, you'll also see that the percentages of A and B students were higher than that at quarter two last year, where we had only 14% receiving all A's and 32% receiving all B's. And that the percentages of A and B students were also slightly higher than at quarter one, where 19% received all A's and 33% received all B's. So overall, at the high end of our marks, we have students receiving better performance or performing better than we saw at quarter one. What you also see here is that the percentage of our lower scoring marks, our D's and our F's, have also decreased during that same time period. We have 9% of students who receive D's or higher and 18% receiving F's or higher. And that's lower than what we had seen at quarter one and more comparable and actually even better performance than what we had seen in the prior year at quarter two. The pie chart on the right of this slide shows a breakout of how many of our students are maintaining, improving, or decreasing their marks between quarter one and quarter two. And you'll see that the majority maintain their grades. It was about 63%. 22% of our students actually improved their grades between quarter one and quarter two, and that leads to the better performance we're seeing right now at quarter two. And lastly, about 15% had decreased grades. Now, perhaps the most important improvements that we've seen from quarter one to quarter two was that all of our student groups, when we looked at our racial ethnic groups, our economically disadvantaged students, our students with disabilities, and even our English learners, showed progress in these marks ranges and were doing better at quarter two than they had previously. However, while the marks were improving for all of our groups, there was still concern about our English learner students, because unlike the other groups, they hadn't improved as much as was needed in order to perform similarly to the prior year. Moving on to the next slide, we'll take a look at the elementary performance that we were able to see. For the current report, we also looked at elementary marks as well as elementary benchmark performance. And for the marks reporting, the results were pretty similar to what we had seen at the secondary level. This slide shows our data around the benchmark performance on our universal screener or iReady scores this year. What you'll see on this slide is that on the right-hand graph, the percent of students that were at or above the reading benchmark, meaning they were performing at the level that's considered appropriate for the grade that they're in, is shown in orange. And that was 71% this year, which was actually higher than what we've seen in the prior year or prior years, where it was 63% last year. And on the left-hand side of the graph, in the pie chart, you'll see again that most of our students maintained, almost 83% of our students were maintaining that same level of performance as they had in the prior year. And about 11% improved, meaning they went from scoring below benchmark levels on the universal screener last year to being at or above the benchmark this year, while 6% showed the reverse, moving from above benchmark to below benchmark. Now, the disaggregated data that's included in the report shows similar patterns or group differences to what we found in our prior years. That is that our Asian and our white students are at or above benchmark about 80% of the time, while all of our other student groups have lower performance. This year, our Black students, 66% of them were at above benchmark. Our Hispanic, our economically disadvantaged, our students with disabilities were all in the 40% range. And then our English learners were at 25% this year. And our English learners in particular are a notable difference because they were actually had fewer students at or above benchmark than in prior years. And that was different from all our other groups. This year, as I said, it was 25%. In prior years, it was 34%. So looking across all the performance data, there's a need to continue to enhance the supports for our basic needs, the well-being and the academics for any of our students that are struggling in these areas, and focusing in particular on our English learner students. Now I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide. And on this final slide today about the findings from the study, we're going to take a look at the social emotional well-being of our students, or the stress that they reported to us. We were able to compare the information that we gathered this year to what was previously reported in the Fairfax County Youth Survey. The graph shows that students at elementary, middle, and high school all reported increased levels of stress this year during the COVID pandemic. The average level of stress in terms of the ratings remains in the moderate range, which is typically identified as a score between 4 to about 7. And so our scores are still, or our reported level of stress that students are telling us are still in that general range of moderate. But a majority of our high school students in particular, 54% of them reported high levels of stress. So from our focus groups with students, we know that this school year has been a contributor to these elevated stress levels. And we have just a couple quotes on this slide from some of the students who participated. Things like, kids don't get breaks, days of school and homework, rinse and repeat. And then another student said, it's scary because there's no escape from school because it's always at home. So in summary, we need to continue to focus on the well-being of our students, and in particular, address student workload issues, which were, there's data in the report that shows that that was related to increased stress this year and to help to decrease the student stress, whether students are in person or virtual. So more about teaching and learning during this year is included, as well as additional information about the student voices and what they told us when they were in the focus groups is in the main report. And I will now turn it over to Dr. Lisa Williams, the Chief Equity Officer, for the next part of the presentation.
Thank you. Because we know the pandemic has had inequitable impacts, and we know that we have data that suggests that our community is experiencing many of the same challenges that are happening in the larger environment, we're inviting all leaders to consider their work in serving schools through the 3A model. And I'm going to take a few moments and talk a little bit about that. The 3 A's for us include affirming, assessing, and advancing. And it's an orientation to the work that allows us to think about issues of equity and access in the context of the doing on a daily basis. The goal of the model is to invite our presence to the conditions impacting the personhood of the members of our community, the challenges and the triumphs as we make decisions in teaching and learning and engaging, and ultimately being informed and influenced by what it is that we are present to on a daily basis. So let me go a little bit deeper into this protocol. First, we are asking that we slow down and again, sort of notice in a holistic way what is happening in our larger community. The fundamental questions that affirming challenges us to consider is, do I see my students and staff in the larger community? People are not just the traumas that they've experienced. We know that some communities, students, and staff have had significantly greater challenges in this period and will have greater challenges in the periods to come. Affirming asks us to go into a deeper contemplation and understanding so that we might see people through their assets and strengths, not just a sum of their deficits. Assessing is an invitation to an evaluation to the conditions for learning in a holistic manner, right? So how do we think about those social emotional elements of teaching and learning, as well as the cognitive behavioral engagement needs that students might need? And how do we think about the learning environment in its totality as we make decisions about how we move forward on a daily basis? Because we know that there is a significant opportunity for us all in this moment, and again, in the moments to come, to learn such that we're being responsive to the changes that our community has experienced. And so from that knowledge that is gleaned from our presence in affirming, our analysis of the sufficiency of the learning environment, how do we advance? How do we move forward being compelled by what we have learned and have it show up in the decisions we make around curriculum, the decisions we make around pedagogy, the decisions we make around assessments of learning? How are we compelled by that learning, and how are we informed by that learning as we codify our forward movement? And so instead of having the equity conversation sit outside of the teaching, learning, and leading environment, the 3A model is a simplistic way that we're inviting stakeholders to really lean into the day-to-day centering of equity and access in response to both data that are known and data that will be known over time to the job embedded needs for us to really think holistically and be adaptive and responsive. So with that, I will now turn it over to Dr. Presidio, who will give more context to our RTS model.
All right, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Dr. Williams, and thank you, Dr. Williams, for sharing the affirming, assessing, and advancing model that's guiding our equity work. And we're really using that model to embed all of the work and guide the work that we're doing in our return to school efforts, in our work planning for our student supports, which you see represented on this slide here. And there is a lot of information here, but this is our model really around supporting students for the remainder of the year. And I want to take just a few minutes and unpack it because there's a lot of important ideas here. First of all, I just want to point out and note that the work that we're doing for the remainder of the year is really prioritizing our caring culture and student success throughout the remainder of the school year. And there's 3 key areas of focus in that work: social emotional wellness, attendance and engagement, and academics. And for social emotional wellness, we're continuing to focus on student relationships with direct social emotional learning support provided on a regular basis in all of our schools through morning meetings in our elementary schools and through advisories in our middle schools and high schools. And we're doing a lot of work in central office to provide teams at the schools and teachers in our buildings with resources, but also training on how to do social emotional work well with students, how to create the time and space to do that well in their schedules. And we're really, really proud of the efforts that our schools have made and the commitment that they've shown to this work. And we're excited by a lot of the stories that we're hearing as students return back in person as well, that, that time and that focus on relationships is building a stronger classroom culture that's helping students connect in new ways, helping to address some of those anxiety and stress levels that we know have been so prevalent for so many of our students throughout the year. So we want to just really raise up the work that our schools are doing in that regard. We're also doing a lot of work, as you can see here, on raising student voice. As Dr. Williams talked about, we know how important it is for our students to feel seen and to feel heard. And to that end, we're working really hard to provide opportunities to connect with students through focus groups, through structured interviews, and to hear directly from our students about the supports that they need to make sure that they can be successful for the remainder of the school year and beyond. And we know we learn best when we listen to our students, so we're creating a lot more time and space for those opportunities. We're also continuing, though, to hold ourselves accountable, and you see that really in the division data monitoring around each of these three key focus areas. So on the social emotional wellness side, as Leedy mentioned, we're continuing to conduct student surveys and student interviews and looking at that data to see if we're actually seeing a difference as we respond to the student issues and needs that have been identified. And that's a really critical and important piece of the work that we're doing. The second area that we want to talk about is attendance and engagement. And a big focus here is proactive family communication. We're working really, really hard to communicate with all of our families, particularly students that might be exhibiting academic challenges that we notice or social emotional challenges. And we're doing everything that we can to communicate in multilingual formats and communicate with families in their native language. And in the previous work session, Mr. Frisch had asked a question about, tools and resources to do that work. And we can always use more tools and resources, but we are really excited that we've adopted a few key tools that are making this work easier this year. We've provided all of our teachers with applications and software that they can use to send messages to families in that family's native home language. The family can respond to the teacher, and then the application software translates it into English for the teacher. We're also providing interpretation and translation services to all of our schools that have been funded with some of our grant dollars. So those things are making a big difference. We need to make sure they're being used consistently, and we need to find ways to continue to fund those resources and supports as we move out of the pandemic. We're also continuing to monitor our attendance on a regular basis and make sure that all of our students are connecting and engaging in schools in meaningful ways. So we're continuing to create enrollment reports and absenteeism reports to track and monitor that data. And then the third big area of focus for us here is around academics. And we're continuing to stay focused on our essential standards for the year, making sure that students are prepared adequately for learning in the subsequent grade levels or courses that they'll take after this school year. But perhaps even more importantly is we're doing a lot of work on the individual student level to assess and monitor individual student progress. We've put in a lot of additional resources for teachers to help with that work. And schools are really working hard to identify any students that might be falling behind and not making the expected progress, and working to ensure that they have plans to support them to accelerate their learning. And two of our largest groups that we're really focused on are English language students who do need that language development, and our students with disabilities. And as Leedy mentioned, our data shows that those are the two subgroups that have experienced the most challenges in a virtual learning environment this year. So we're continuing to provide those personalized supports to students, and we're continuing to monitor, again, at the school and division level, how students are doing in terms of grades and progress reports, as well as on assessments. And that information ultimately will be used to make those opportunities for students who do need some additional support in learning time in the summer, to give them an opportunity to attend our robust summer programs, which I'll talk about in an upcoming slide here in just a minute. The last thing I want to note here, though, is that all of this work is being led in each of our schools by our multi-tiered system of support, or our MTSS teams. And those teams, again, are interdisciplinary teams with teacher leaders, resource teachers, administrators, counselors, psychologists, social workers that really take a whole child approach to identifying students that have academic needs or social emotional needs, and developing individualized plans to accelerate supports for those students to ensure their success. So this is kind of the framework that we're using as we wrap up the school year. And again, we believe that focusing on these three areas will allow us to maximize student learning and student success as we look to close out the school year. Next, what I'd like to do is just share a little bit of information about some of the things we're planning as we look forward, as we wrap up the school year, and then look into the summer and into next school year. So first, I want to talk just briefly about some of the fourth quarter end of the year supports. And as I mentioned, our focus, of course, is going to be on maximizing opportunities to support students' social emotional wellness and academic needs. And one of the major ways that we're doing this is by trying to maximize in-person learning opportunities for students. And the return to in-person learning is really giving us an important way to engage with students and connect with students, particularly our most vulnerable students, in new ways. So we're working really hard to maximize those in-person learning opportunities, maximize our capacity. And one of the things that we're asking all of our families today is that if students have registered to attend in person, we need them to do so on a regular basis. It's really important because those seats and the capacity in our buildings really is at a premium. And if students have registered to attend in person, but they're not attending on a regular basis by March 26th, which is the day before spring break, it is possible that those students might be returned to the virtual learning environment, because after March 26th, our schools are going to be working very hard to identify students who have the most significant learning needs, again, using that MTSS process, and they'll be inviting those students in when space is available, either for new or for additional in-person learning opportunities. So we want to really make sure that we're maximizing our in-person learning capacity and aligning our supports in person and providing those to our most vulnerable students. The next big idea that I want to reference here is around changes to our grading policies at the secondary level. And we're really, really happy to be able to announce today new grading policy flexibility that we think is going to address some of those ongoing student stress needs that we saw in our data set earlier in this presentation. And we think that these changes are going to promote student learning and student engagement with learning throughout the end of the school year as well. So in addition to the grading policy flexibility that was approved back in December, we're now adding 3 additional adjustments to our grading policies. And the first is that students will receive a mark of NM, or no mark, stands for no mark, instead of F grades in any of their high school credit-bearing courses, which will allow students an opportunity to really continue to work towards a passing grade during our summer extended learning opportunities. And again, I'll talk about those more in just a minute. And this no mark would then also work to make sure that students' GPAs are not adversely affected as they continue to earn credit throughout the summer in those courses. Second, for classes that do have final exams, we are asking all of our students to take the final exams. However, it's important to note that the final exams would only be used to raise a student's grade, so not to lower it. So again, we think that this is a policy change that will help address some of the student stress and probably really lead to more productive studying and hopefully more long-term retention of material through the end of the school year. And then finally, we're allowing students to choose the option of taking a P or a pass in any classes in which they're earning passing grades instead of that particular letter grade. And again, what this does is it will allow students to be able to protect their GPA if they feel like their course performance was not as high as it would have been under normal learning conditions. And again, we don't want the learning conditions during the pandemic to adversely affect student performance, particularly at the high school level, where it might impact their ability for post-secondary opportunities. So we're really excited about these opportunities, and we think that they're going to provide additional support for our students as they wrap up the school year. Next, I'd also like to share that there will be federal and state testing requirements in fourth quarter this school year. So the Department of Education at the federal level and at the state level will be requiring spring testing. So our standards of learning tests, for example, will be required. However, we will have flexibility to provide virtual testing for families and students who do not feel comfortable coming in to test in person. So that's really good. That additional flexibility is very helpful. And parents also will have some additional flexibility if they choose to opt out over health concerns this particular year. As far as advanced placement courses go, there's been some flexibility offered by the College Board. Most of the testing will take place in a virtual learning environment, which again is great for students this year. And then the IB organization has provided even more flexibility, and they will not be doing external testing this year. They actually will be using internal assessments and course performance for students to be able to satisfy IB diploma and certificate requirements. So we really appreciate their flexibility. And then there are some progress monitoring assessments that we offer internally in Fairfax that will be used to help us judge student learning over the course of the year, and as one data point to identify students who might need summer learning supports as well. And those will also be able to be offered in a virtual environment. And then probably most importantly to our students is end of the year activities. And we know how important in-person activities at the end of the year are. In-person ceremonies, rites of passage, graduation, proms, events like that, all through the continuum of elementary, middle, and high, those promotion ceremonies. We know how important those are to students, to families, and to teachers. And we are doing everything that we can to advocate and partner both at the local level and at the state level to provide as much flexibility for those in-person opportunities as possible. Work is underway, and we will have more details, hopefully, to be able to share in our next return to school update after spring break. But we're working very, very closely, not just with the health department, but also with the VDOE and the governor's office on this important issue. And then finally, I wanted to spend just a few minutes talking a little bit about some of the planning that's underway for summer learning programs. And in the previous work session this morning, we did talk about this a little bit as well. And I did repost as part of the documents that are shared today on board docs, a copy of the January presentation to the board that has a lot more details and detailed budget information on our summer program offerings. But the summary really is provided here on this slide. And really the big idea is that we will have an extensive really program of summer learning opportunities K through 12 this school year. We're anticipating serving over 40,000 students with an investment of over $30 million using federal CARES dollars. Additionally, we will be offering programming at every one of our schools, elementary, middle, and high. If a school happens to be closed for renovation, that school will partner with a nearby neighborhood school. So every school will be able to offer robust summer programming this year. The number of students at each of the programs, or excuse me, at each of the school sites will vary a little bit because they will be staffed based on the enrollment needs of the students at that particular school. And we're happy to be able to access some additional funds through our Title I grant to provide even more seat space and services at our Title I schools. But the big picture idea at the different levels is really depicted here. You see at the elementary level, we'll have math and literacy acceleration, as well as a Bridge to K program and a new program, a Bridge to First Grade at all of our elementary schools. Middle school and high school will have math and literacy acceleration. And then at high school, we'll have a very robust and extended credit recovery program where students will have the opportunity to earn up to 2 credits during the summer term. So again, those students that might be failing as the fourth quarter ends can take a no mark and can roll into summer school and continue to work towards earning credit and earning that letter grade in those courses and removing that no mark from their transcript. Special education programming is going to be extensive as well. Dr. Boyd talked about more than a $6 million investment serving more than 6,000 students in our recovery services program, as well as an extended school year program serving about 4,000 students. And again, enrollment in all of these programs will be based on identified student learning need. And as we get closer to the end of the school year, we'll have more details about that process. But basically, families will be contacted by the schools if the school staff and MTSS team feels like their students would benefit from summer learning opportunities. And the dates of the programs are all listed on this slide. So hopefully that will help a little bit with family summer planning as well. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Brabrand again, who'll share a little bit of information about some of the planning that's underway for next fall.
Thank you, Dr. Presidio. And before I turn to the slide, I just want to take two of the things that you shared and talk just a moment in a little bit more detail. I am confident, working collaboratively with the Office of the Governor, that we will be providing in-person graduation for Fairfax County Public School students this spring with our seniors, the graduating class of 2021, in accordance with the parameters that the governor and VDH will lay out. I am confident the collaboration that we continue to have in the governor's office will help us successfully offer in-person graduations with the appropriate protocol. So stay tuned for further information. We do expect that information before April, but stay tuned and we'll have more information to share on that very important topic very soon. I also want to say, before turning to this next slide, that Dr. Presidio, working with our principals, instructional services, working with our students and listening to student voice, we have brought forth the most significant landmark changes to grading in a generation in Fairfax County Public Schools that will truly help really bring equity to how we approach students and assessment. So I am proud of the work that this pandemic has had us produce in this area. And I thank Dr. Presidio for his leadership, working with all of our stakeholders around those grading approaches. We have listened and we have made our approach even better than before. Finally, now, as we wrap up this presentation, I want to clearly say to the community and to this board, as I shared at the beginning of the presentation, that we are planning for a strong 5-day in-person start to the 21-22 school year. Last year, as you know, with the pandemic, we focused on a strong virtual start. Let me be clear, this fall, we will be focused on a strong in-person start. And we will be spending time now through the beginning of this fall preparing the transition for a successful 5-day in-person start to the school year next year. I also want to say right now to members of the community, for those of you who returned in person this past month, we thank you. I thank you for trusting us to bring your children back in a safe and responsible fashion. And I believe we've done so. For those parents and families and caregivers that have remained virtual with us, we thank you, and we will continue through the remainder of this year to meet your child's needs in this environment. We also hope to build your trust and confidence to return your children to us for in-person instruction this fall. And finally, I want to say to those families who left FCPS this year, as you and your family dealt with this pandemic, I offer you a simple yet sincere message. You should feel confident that it is time to come home. It's time to come home to Fairfax County Public Schools. We want you to rejoin our FCPS family this fall. Registration is already beginning for kindergarten, I know, this week at many of our schools. Please contact your child's FCPS school at whatever level they are in, and you can get information on registering for the fall. The earlier you register, the better we can plan, and we plan and hope on your return to Fairfax County Public Schools. As we look ahead to the fall, we know there'll be new routines to establish, a new school culture to build post-pandemic. And children who've never set foot in a building or haven't been in a building for over a year. We'll be reuniting our school communities and re-engaging families and students, and that means starting later this spring, a massive outreach to our current and former families to ensure they're aware of our plans, as we've outlined today, and to support those families who may have questions or concerns about their children returning to in-person instruction. Our focus, as I said, in the fall will be on a strong in-person start. We know that we will still need to provide limited virtual options and offerings to students who will still need them. We anticipate these offerings, though, will be limited, and they will be school-based as they are now. We know that some concurrent learning will continue in the fall. And we also know that a reliance on classroom monitors will end. I want all of you to know that we have talked about since the beginning of this year at putting equity at the center of all that we do. We have an equity imperative to have all of our students back in person in the 21-22 school year who don't otherwise have specific health conditions that would prevent them from returning in the fall. It's time to return normal to Fairfax County Public Schools, or as near normal as we can as we work to exit this pandemic here in Fairfax County. If we can go to the next slide, I just want to wrap up and say we'll continue to monitor all of the health and safety guidance as we've done from the beginning. You know, in a recent meeting with state superintendents, we were joined by the president, vice president, and chair of the School Reopening Task Force from the Virginia chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics, who shared research on exposure to COVID-19 based on distance and the use of masks. There was also just this week a Massachusetts study showing similar findings around social distancing in schools that point to 3 feet instead of 6 feet as an appropriate level of social distancing in consultation or in collaboration with other school safety mitigation strategies. Many of you know, I watched too, that Dr. Fauci spoke this weekend that the CDC will be analyzing all this data carefully as they consider revisions to the current guidance to support schools reopening as we move forward. These studies, as well as the ongoing collaboration with state and local experts, will help inform our preparation for the fall. And as we prepare for a 5-day return, we'll continue to work in partnership with our principals to assess facilities, yes, at lower than 6 feet social distancing, and add any additional safety protocols needed, including the purchase of additional PPE and COVID testing opportunities. We also continue to monitor all the actions, not just from the federal level, but from the state level. We know that the governor is currently reviewing a bill around in-person learning for the fall. And while we do not know how that will be resolved, let me be clear, it is our intention to move forward with providing 5 days of in-person learning this fall, regardless of final action by the General Assembly or the governor. We're also going to continue to monitor other potential developments like updated U.S. Department of Education information. And I look forward to Secretary Cardona bringing together and convening a return to school summit as we look at his 5-point plan and how the U.S. Department of Education can partner together with us as we return our students in the fall. We look forward to continuing to bring you the monthly updates of our return to school work sessions, and we look forward to our April work session after spring break. And I want to end again with saying one last time, it is a moment to be excited for 5 days of instruction in the fall, but also to celebrate this past month the returning of over 100,000 students and over 25,000 employees to Fairfax County Public Schools. Let's take one last look at the successful return to in-person learning. Thank you very much, and we look forward to taking your questions, Ms. Tolan, and members of the school board.
Thank you, Dr. Brabrand and staff for the presentation. We have lots of board members with their hands up already. So we will go ahead and get started. First up is Ms. Karen Corbett-Sanders, followed by Megan McLaughlin.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Brabrand, Dr. Williams, Dr. Presidio. Very nice, very good and comprehensive presentation. I do have a couple of questions, and I'm going to put them out there first, and then perhaps you can answer them. One, in looking at the assessment data and the success of our assessments in the iReady area, have those assessments changed year over year? Because it is pretty striking that we have had greater success, according to this data, than some of the neighboring districts on our younger learners. So anybody know that answer?
Dr. Presidio?
The assessment itself has not changed. Surrounding divisions are using a different assessment. They're using the PALS assessment. The iReady is a national assessment. PALS is just a state assessment. We do speculate that in the virtual environment, probably some of our students are doing better because they're getting some assistance in that virtual testing format, perhaps by family members. So there might be a little bit of a bump there for the earlier learners. See that trend and that pattern start to even out a little bit as you look at the intermediate grades, grades 3 through 6. So those earlier learners, there might be a little bit of reliability in the data. So what we're really doing is, as we wrap up the end of the year, looking to kind of, triangulate that data, if you will, with other assessment points that we have. So we will have some other assessments in the spring, as well as teachers' reports of students in terms of being on grade level or being below grade level.
So if I can ask you to bring that back to us, I'd really appreciate it, because I was intrigued by the delta between our data and neighboring jurisdictions. Next, summer school and the importance of the summer opportunities. One area where we know that our students have lost some time is in the area of CTE and our academy programs. I noticed that we do not have any opportunities for those academy programs in our summer learning. And I'm wondering whether or not we can do that, because we know that the American Relief Act does have funding for those type of programs. And this is a critical area, not only for our children to get certifications, but it also is a great opportunity to start bringing our kids back into our schools.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that question and all of your support and advocacy for our CTE programs. It really is important. We do have some things planned actually currently that I omitted from the slide, just kind of focusing on the core in that particular slide. We are looking at some opportunities for students to do certification testing in the summer, as well as a few enrichment opportunities that we have in some of our CTE programs. But the new legislation that President Biden just signed, of course, is still new. There may be some opportunities to do some things beyond what we currently have planned. So we do have that on our radar. So there are some things currently planned and possibly some future things that we might be able to add as well.
So if we could have an update perhaps in April of that, it would be greatly appreciated, because I know our families are looking for more in that area. The end of the year programming and our end of year celebrations. I know that we are waiting for more data from the federal and state. Is there a way that we can start, as soon as that information is available, we should be pushing that out into our community, because there is a lot of angst by our students and our families that they want to make sure that we appropriately celebrate our student successes. So I asked Dr. Brabrand if we could start pushing that out earlier rather than waiting until April.
Yes, as early as we get the information. And I do want to say this, I anticipate greater flexibility with graduation than I do with prom and all-night grad and some other activities that the Virginia Department of Health sees as social gatherings. We have certainly made the case that we want as much flexibility as we can, and we care about the safety of our students. But they are looking at the graduation guidelines somewhat differently than they are for social gatherings. But as soon as we have it, we will share it. Absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And then on the grading piece, I do want to thank Dr. Presidio. And I also would like to give a shout out to our student representative, Mr. Nathan Anabudo, who has also been advocating for these changes. So thank you very much to both of them. And then last, we do have a number of vacancies in the Head Start program for next year. And I have sent a note off to Dr. Boyd and others about this programming and how we can promote it. But I would encourage that, especially given COVID, that we should be doing everything we can as a school system to get those students who are eligible for Head Start and pre-Head Start into those programs.
Absolutely. We'll be glad to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin, and then Dr. Anderson.
Great, thank you. I'm just pulling up my video. So with 3 minutes, we're obviously really pressed to try and capture 20 minutes or 20 slides and all of that. So I'm just going to jump right in. Dr. Brabrand, I do appreciate your enthusiasm. I've always said, you know, you're a perfect cheerleader for the school system. But I do want to temper some of the enthusiasm in terms of how some of our families are feeling. When Falls Church City Schools announces that post spring break, they'll be looking at 5 days a week for kindergarten through 5th grade. Can you please walk me through what other WABE schools or other school districts in the Commonwealth of Virginia are looking to do more than the 2 days a week we're currently offering?
Yeah, I don't know beyond Falls Church City about anyone doing 5 days a week. I would submit to you that a 2,000 student school district is in no way, shape, or form the same as a 89,000 school district. One of the nuggets is nobody's riding buses. And when they are, the bus distances are so short, they're less than 10 minutes. So they're not even falling within the contact tracing. That's a big nugget, for example, where we have kids here that take, as you remember from an earlier work session pre-pandemic, where we have kids on the bus for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour. And the truth is, too, demographically, some of our diverse community that has chosen to remain virtual is not yet convinced that schools in person can be done as safely. And we're committed to making the case and helping bring each family by name and by need back into in-person learning. But I think it's going to take some time. I can try to find out about some of the other districts around us and bring that to the April meeting. But let me be clear that we will do everything we can. We will be prepared for the fall, and if there's additional guidance, we certainly could even look at the summer. But our approach for the remainder of this year is to identify those kids that need the additional learning, and if we can add some capacity, that will focus on those kids who need it most. Thanks.
I appreciate that. You know, my advocacy pretty much from the start is to utilize our Office of Research and Strategic Innovation to focus entirely on what we know for K-12 instruction and COVID. I'm troubled that your team doesn't know this information already about other schools. I frankly think that today's presentation alone spent way too much on what we're doing, which families already know, and we should have been talking about what's the analysis your team's doing. I don't think 5 days necessarily is something we could have looked for the fourth quarter, because our teachers are dealing with both virtual and in person. But at a minimum, we should continue to look at 4 days where we can with the spacing. And I will be sending to all of you the USA Today editorial from leading epidemiologists who are pointing out that the current CDC guidelines on 6 feet versus 3 has misinterpreted the science, and that there is a reason they even have this data, Dr. Brabrand. It's because schools in Massachusetts, schools in Wisconsin, and even your own counterpart down in Virginia Beach, they are doing things to use the science to know that the 6 feet is at this point now proven to be somewhat arbitrary, because it's the mitigation pieces that we know. And now that our staff are being vaccinated, we just can't keep dragging our feet and calling ourselves a premier system. I really encourage this board and you to seriously consider what we can do, not just keep talking about the fall, but for the time we've got left here. I thank you for wanting to bring in as many kids as you can, but as long as we stay hardened at 6 feet through the end of this school year in June, we're limiting ourselves to do better. And we've got to stop using size as our excuse, because the bottom line is we have 5 area superintendents, we have 200 principals, we have the leadership to customize and do better. And so those are kind of the key points I make. And Ms. Tolan, you can put me on a go back. But Dr. Brabrand, please answer why we're not doing more research on all these studies that are, we're hearing about, and talk about Virginia Beach. If you guys haven't talked to Virginia Beach, that's really alarming.
No, I've certainly talked to Virginia Beach. First of all, and Ms. McLaughlin, I know we have our conversations publicly and privately, and you've been a champion for wanting kids back in person. I appreciate that. You may know 2 weeks ago, I raised the 3-foot issue on CNN nationally. So I'd like to say that I've been part of this conversation nationally to really get folks to look. And I think the CDC is going to look. But what I have heard Director Walensky say is she wants to carefully look, not just at one data study, but at multiple studies. And I've asked them for, at both the state and federal level, pull together the research on school districts with 3 feet so that we can share with our community. Some of this isn't necessarily what you think or I think, it's what our community thinks. And we know already from our data that our community, many members of our community are not ready to return in person, and we've got to help make that case. One other little nugget, and again, I'll get more for April. I believe Falls Church City is going to stay at 6 feet to do their 5 days. They have a lot of new facilities that have been coming on board. They've built a new high school. And their class size is among the very lowest in the Washington region. So those are a few of the other dynamics in addition to the whole bus runs separation. But we'll get some more information for you on that. And we are, again, continuing to really work with our state and local folks to look at the data with them. Again, Dr. Boyd, this is fresh off the press, very, very low COVID transmission data since January. We've done a great job with school mitigation. We need to keep doing that and show our community that it's safe to return in person. So thank you.
But Dr. Brabrand, the question I'd ask is, what is the Office of Research doing to gather Massachusetts, Wisconsin, and other school divisions? Like, I appreciate the state, but if they're not doing it, we have a really capable shop, and I'm not seeing the research coming out of your team. What's going on?
Well, it's not as easy as it sounds. We certainly can have ORSI work with it, and they have, but a lot of it, even as I'm talking to the state superintendent, there's not been a systematic capturing of the data at the state or federal level for these districts. There just hasn't been. There needs to be, because this is how we can inform policymakers like yourself on what to do going forward as we look at narrowing or reducing that 6 foot social distancing. We've messaged 6 foot for almost a year. And so now, as we talk about going less than 6 feet, we've got to bring the data. And so I'll continue to work with ORSI, but it's not like it's hanging out there as low hanging fruit and we're not bringing it to you. There was a Wisconsin study, a rural study in Wisconsin, and Massachusetts study. Those have been the 2 best studies thus far. And we can bring you some more information about those studies so you can see. But we really are wanting even more information And I am hopeful that I'll have a chance to talk with Secretary Cardona and a few other large district superintendents in another week or two. And we're going to be asking some of the specific questions you've asked me about the research at less than 6 feet.
All right, thank you, Dr. Brabrand, Ms. McLaughlin. Dr. Anderson?
All righty, thank you. So much to bring up, but so little time. Thank you for this information. I'm going to hone in on a couple of areas, and then I would like to be added for a go back. When we're talking about summer school, I think that began on slide 16, Dr. Presidio. Is the summer school virtual, in person, concurrent? I'm not sure if I'm clear in terms of what the actual platform will be.
Well, thank you very much for that question. And I apologize for omitting a very important fact. Summer programs will be in person. So we are working for an in-person format in summer programs.
That is very exciting news, because I was concerned that we would have virtual summer school, which pretty much is more of the same, and we're trying to come out of that hole. So thank you for that information. You also talked a little bit in terms of that after spring break, some students will be offered 4 days a week instruction, and that is depending on the specific school site. Can you give a little bit more detail there in terms of what families could be thinking may be out there and possible for them?
Right. So I think the key message that we want everybody to understand is we're working really, really hard to maximize our in-person learning space that we have in our buildings now. So we're looking at our data in leadership team meetings on a daily basis, reviewing that capacity information. And what we've learned from the study that was shared by Orsi earlier in this presentation is that we know there's been a disproportionate impact on learning for some of our most vulnerable student populations. We want to make sure that we prioritize students who need that additional in-person learning support to be able to receive it, to maximize the existing space that we do have. So we're using our MTSS process, our multi-tiered system of support process, for school-based teams to identify those students who do have those academic or social emotional needs where they would benefit from in-person, and getting those students in as frequently as possible. So that might mean if some of those students were not currently registered for in-person, we would invite them first to return where we have seat space availability. Or if those students were already attending 2 days, we would perhaps ask them to attend 3 or 4 days per week to get them more time in person. So we're really, really trying to use the MTSS approach and identify the students that we need to get in person as frequently as possible with our existing capacity.
Okay, but what I'm hearing, because similarly to what Ms. McLaughlin shared, we do have a lot of families who are asking questions. Is 4 days a week possible for them before the end of the school year? What could we possibly do during the fourth quarter? And what I'm hearing from you, that this is not a question you are yet able to respond to at this time, at least for the whole division.
Correct. At this time, we're just looking at individual students based on their individual learning needs for additional in-person learning opportunities. If that changes, if something changes with the amount of social distancing perhaps, or if something else changes operationally, then we certainly can reconsider that and would have conversations with the board about that. At this point, we're really just looking to serve students that have been identified by those site-based teams as needing additional support.
Okay, thank you. Similarly to the question that I think Ms. Corbett-Sanders had, I had questions regarding the iReady assessment results. They seem to be not exactly what we would expect in this environment where we know students have not had the benefit of that guided and structured instruction from teachers in person. And you talked a little bit about the inflation that may have taken place with our younger students because of additional assistance from home. How are we going to mitigate that? What assessments are we looking for teachers to administer so we have a more accurate picture of where our students are? Is there a conversation of the DRA being administered? Can you walk me through that a little bit, please?
Yeah, so at the risk of making this a little too complicated, the iReady is a screening tool. when you look at those results, it's not saying that those students are below grade level. What it's saying is that we need more information on those students to determine if they need any additional supports to make sure that we can get them on grade level and keep them on grade level. So it's just a screener. And what we do is when we identify those students that are below that benchmark that Leedy discussed, is we do additional diagnostic assessment with those students. So the DRA is one of those diagnostic assessments. Similarly, we have an MRA in math that we use. So we do have those diagnostic assessments. We also have other progress monitoring assessments, internal assessments that we've created in FCPS that are kind of what we refer to as curriculum embedded assessments. So they're part of the curriculum that's being taught and are meant to be administered as part of units of study. We also have what are referred to as our Horizon e-card assessments that we will be giving later this spring. And then of course, at grade levels where the SOLs are given, there's the SOL assessment. And then we will be giving the iReady again in the spring. So ultimately, we'll be using all of those data points to, again, triangulate those data points to identify the students that we are concerned about, that we definitely want to get in for summer acceleration and continue to provide additional supports to. So it's really a battery of assessments, as well as the progress reports that the teachers complete for each individual student at the elementary level, where they indicate if students are on grade level in reading or math.
Okay, thank you for that. Will we be provided with similar information once those assessments are administered?
Well, we can certainly make all of that information available to the board. I know that ORSI has at least 2 more iterations of their report plans. So they'll have a 3rd quarter report and a 4th quarter report. But anything that's not included as part of that formal report, we can make those data sets available as well.
Thank you. Another question that I've been receiving quite a bit from folks in our community is the belief that some of the supports that are being provided are resulting in grade inflation, so that students are appearing to perform better than they actually are. How would you suggest that that I provide an answer to the community regarding those questions?
Well, I think the first thing that I would encourage the community members to know is how hard teachers and students are working this year. And I don't want to take anything away from those efforts because they really have been Herculean on the part of both students and teachers this year. So I think we're seeing some positive trends of that work reflected in some of these results. What I would say is people that are skeptical of grade performance, again, it's always looking at multiple data points. So, you know, certainly if a parent is concerned about that, they can have some conversations with the teacher. They can also look at some of the assessment work that students will be doing, again, particularly where there's some of those external assessments, like SOLs, like AP tests, like IB tests, and looking at that in conjunction with the grades. So, you know, any one data point on its own, I mean, I think is something that you would always want to consider within that limited context. So probably looking at multiple data points, but again, also recognizing how hard teachers and students are working.
Okay. Thank you.
If I could, Dr. Anderson, one of the things too, grade inflation is one way to frame it, and then grading inequity is another way. We have addressed grading inequity in many of these grading policy changes. We've given out zeros for years at half of our high schools that were inequitable, that were disproportionate, that buried kids alive who could never give out. And this pandemic finally brought their voices out to cry in the wilderness, help. We've changed something that lots of districts changed years ago, and this board boldly supported that kind of grading reform. And so I would say to those that push grading inflation, it's less about inflation and more about doing the right thing for kids who were pummeled by an inequitable grading system that we have finally worked to rectify. Colleges have been doing this pass-fail option for kids for years that we're just about to do. So I really am proud of the work that I think this board, including Nathan and other members of this board, have pushed us to do the hard equity work of grading reform. Thanks.
Thank you. And my last question before my time runs out, on slide 7, you show student mark ranges from last year to this year. I just want to share that I continue to be concerned that about a quarter of our students, even with the change that is very similar to last year's, but 25% of our students continue to get D's and lower grades. So I'm concerned about that. The question that I do have is regarding the circle graph on the right, where you have 63% of students that are maintaining. Is this maintaining whatever grade they were at, or is this maintaining a passing grade? Because they could be maintaining D's, and I just want to be sure that I'm reading this information correctly.
And I can speak to that. Yes, it would be maintaining regardless of what their grades were. So if they were at F previously or at D previously, that would mean they were maintaining those as well. So it's not a perfect picture of what a successful student would do, but it's a partial picture in conjunction with some of the other information that's in the report to see whether our students were progressing or not. So that is one of the reasons that you might see a lot of our groups that had a lot of low performance previously moving up. That would be part of the reason that they're moving up, is they have more of an opportunity to improve beyond where they were initially.
Thank you. I'll follow up on my go. Thank you, Ms. Tolan.
Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
Thank you. I'm just waiting for my video to come on. I appreciate that. I'm just going to pick up where Dr. Anderson left off. And I just wanted to make my first comment about where she picked up about grading, inflation, inequity, some of these I-ready comments that have come up. Here's my concern. I get it from, we're under COVID. It's an unusual circumstance. Our students are trying hard. They're stressed out. I understand all of that. My concern is, I believe I'm seeing and hearing from my constituents an over-reliance on grades and I-ready test scores and other assessments for identifying students for interventions, whether it's interventions now, interventions this summer. I know you've mentioned MTSS model for intervention, but that's not really what I'm hearing from schools. I'm hearing there's a lot of interventions being based on grades or assessments. So what are we doing to sort of audit the fidelity of implementation of identifying students using an MTSS model versus an over-reliance on grades? I don't want sort of our grace under COVID to then leave out students who might actually need interventions. In the same way, I would posit our revised IEPs that were revised due to virtual learning. I think we should be identifying students based on the IEPs that were written last spring, as opposed to the ones that revised this fall. So that's my first question. If someone could address that statement or comment.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Thank you. So I think, what's happening is schools are trying to provide as many supports for students as possible. So it's not just, one size fits all approach to student supports. They are providing academic interventions when students are, basically when student performance is indicating that they might need a little bit of help. That can look different in different schools. Some schools have time built in to the schedule where students can go and receive intervention services and supports from individual teachers. Most of our schools have that. Some of them have things set up before and after school. They're using, asynchronous time on Mondays to connect kids with teachers who need a little bit of additional academic help. And those are supports that are really probably more what we might call tutoring supports, really, to be honest with you. When we talk about, formalized interventions, usually what we're talking about is something that is, more long-term, more ongoing, more structured. And I think those are the things that typically some of the points you're raising are really important to consider to make sure that kids aren't getting stuck in an intervention track, and being limited in terms of their course taking options and, availability. Which is always an issue that we have to keep an eye on. So I'm glad you raised it. But I think what we're doing right now is trying to find as many different support structures as possible for students. And the MTSS team is not looking just at academics. They are looking at social emotional wellness needs. They're looking at student engagement needs. So, identifying students that aren't attending on a regular basis, or that maybe teachers have concerns about, they're attending, they're showing up in class, but they're not participating. How can we get them more actively engaged in their schoolwork? So there's a variety of different things that that schools are trying right now. And, they're working really, really hard to get students the supports that they need. So it really is more of a multifaceted approach, I think.
I appreciate that. And I just wanted to make sure that we are really, when we're looking at our summer programming, that we're really being careful not to base it on grades. That's just my point. I'm not trying, I don't blame anybody for where we're at, but I also don't want students to get not identified who need services. So just to be really careful with that. Dr. Brabrand, you said something, and I apologize if I misquoted you earlier about school-based virtual in the fall with some concurrent learning. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, please?
Sure. We think virtual as an option for next year will be limited, and it will be focused more on being provided school-based, not system-based. We know Virtual Virginia will still actually be expanded. It's been expanded during this pandemic, but we will not be standing up a division-wide virtual system. We will be focused on options virtually. And then concurrent, and we'll be working on providing guidance about concurrent, but I do believe that concurrent will have a role even out of this pandemic for very specific instances and cases, and we'll need to better define what those look like. We don't want concurrent at any kind of level that we have now, but I do see the platforms that we've created when a student might be on homebound or a student has a prearranged absence. How will we look at how kids connect and stay connected? And I don't believe we are going to completely walk away from concurrent as a tool to keep our kids connected to instruction. But we've got to better define it. And I don't have all the answers today in this work session, but it's part of the discussion that is bubbling up. We know too much concurrent is too much workload for teachers, but I do think targeted concurrent instruction will be a tool that we're simply not going to throw away even as the pandemic leaves us. I don't know, Sloan, would you like to add anything else about that?
No, I think that's a great summary. I mean, I would just add that we've had a work team really since November that has central office administrators, principals, other school-based staff, really working to figure out what's the best approach to providing virtual instruction when needed in the future. And we're still working through that right now. I definitely think we'll have more updates, hopefully in April, that we can talk maybe a little bit more about it then.
Okay.
I'll look forward to that. I just want to put out that I've heard a lot of concerns about more wide-scale concurrent teaching or concurrent learning. And I've also heard concerns about schools being able to stand up a virtual option that we may need next year as we're still coming out of COVID, as opposed to long-term for homebound and things like that. So I think it'd be good to sort of talk differently about long-term for students who are, again, homebound or ill versus what we're doing next year when we still may be coming out of the pandemic. I think that would be helpful to delineate those two. The other thing, Dr. Presidio, I meant to mention, when we're looking for identifying students who may have space for 4 days, after spring break, I would posit please don't just consider grades for that as well. Like that's the same from earlier. So not just the interventions this summer, but also for those who may need to come in for additional space. I have a question about our summer programming. I know, so I heard the number of $30 million we're using for those, but I'm concerned about what comes across to me is the small-ish numbers of students who right now qualify for summer programming. I mean, I did the math. I'm trying to scroll through. I have 7 pages of notes. So I'm trying to scroll through my 7 pages of notes, but it seemed like if you include the bridge programs, it's about 20% of our elementary school students qualify. Is there room for more programming than that? And I'll take a go back.
Sloan, you might be on mute.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Sorry about that. No, it's about 25% of our overall student population when you total everything up. I think the most important thing to recognize is that the enrollment will vary by school. Some schools are going to have more students than that, and others are going to have fewer. It's pretty much in line with what we're seeing in terms of, some of our other data points that we're looking at in terms of students that are behind, students that are experiencing a lot of additional social emotional concerns and issues. So I think it's a pretty good number. It's not it's not in black and white. we can adjust it if we need to. It is going to be based on those decisions made at the individual school level for the students that are identified in need. We do have, or at least we believe that we will have with the new ESSER 3 funds, some additional funds to support, remediation and interventions. And, if necessary, we could probably go above this number. But it is a lot of students, and it will require a lot of teachers to be available during the summer after a really, really long year. So, we always have to balance out our operational capacity as well as when we look at these things.
Dr. Presidio, a nugget that may be helpful for the board. I think you told it to me before, but I don't want to get it wrong. This summer school is an order of magnitude times what? I think you had a number.
Times 10, 10-fold.
Times 10. 10 times the summer school this summer than our previous summers. So we are going big. We may have to go bigger, but we're already going and planning for a 10 times order of magnitude summer school approach. And if it's not enough to capture the kids at the end of the year grading, then, we'll look to have some additional funds brought forward.
Thank you. I think that was my time. If you could put me on a go back, please, Ms. Tolan, I appreciate it.
Okay, that was your time, and everyone has asked for a go back. Just a quick time check, it's already 3 p.m. So maybe staff, if you can be very concise in your replies, that will help us move forward.
All right.
Ms. Marin.
Thank you. Yeah, this is really exciting. It's nice to have this to be hopeful about. I think we have to remain cautious and there's so much planning. Things I'm seeing from my constituency is that, I've got about 50% of my schools where students have shown up for in-person learning, and in some it's much lower. So, I'm hearing from some parents that are asking for more in school in the spring. And I just want to share it. On one side, I'm glad to hear what Dr. Presidio is saying, that accommodating students on a case-by-case basis to attend more than 2 days can be considered, especially if we aren't seeing the return to in-person as we thought we could actually bear. I do hope we can find some solutions there. On the other hand, I am very cautious about expectations by the public or the board for any large pivot that will change the operational approach that has taken months to put into place, that kids are preparing for and just experiencing. I've been watching my son's second grade teacher offer concurrent last week, and to think of asking her plus principals and staff to pivot and now create new instructional groups, seating charts, schedules for students with disabilities, transportation assignments, and more with just 12 weeks of school left. I mean, it's just, it does not seem possible. It doesn't seem prudent. I think it would be bad for kids to change the plan right now. But to this point, I also do want to underscore that I've heard from so many principals that elementary is a totally different animal than secondary. So if we are able to make some accommodations to bring more students back this spring, I urge Dr. Brabrand and staff to not make a monolithic decision that all elementary and secondary must do the same things. They're really quite different animals. And, I need to say, I really urge the public and my colleagues to acknowledge and really accept that this was a remarkable year. And just thinking in particular about the summer offerings, those offerings, as intense as they may be, they're not going to, get kids where they could have been if they were there previously, where they might have been, but our kids have grown, they have survived strife. And so I just urge us to still accept that this is still a remarkable situation. I'm very excited, Dr. Brabrand, to hear your warm welcome of return for families who left the system. I hope people will return. Our public schools are strong, and I really want to get that message out as much as we can. I am very concerned about summer staffing for those programs. I'm glad Dr. Presidio mentioned it. Our staff worked pretty much all summer last summer when they're not on contract too. Given the continuing national shortage of teaching and staff and the vitriol against teachers that has arisen just in this past year, I think we need to be realistic with families about, what's possible, and, it's just going to be difficult to staff them. The last thing I want to touch on is outdoor learning. What is happening to make some of these outdoor learning situations? Can we use the outdoors this spring? And then for the fall, I'd love to hear about that. Okay, thank you.
Well, thanks, Ms. Marin. A couple of quick things I'd say. First of all, I think our staff would be cheering many of your words because we have made so many major pivots. And we do have to be honest, right? If we're going to have real talk at the board table, we cannot exhaust our teachers here in the fourth quarter and then expect them to show up in mass for a summer program that's 10 times bigger, which means we need 10 times the staff that we normally do. And we want our very best teachers to teach kids over the summer. So we have to continue to manage workload for our kids, as we've done with these new grading policies, but with our staff as well. And there's still going to be a lot of work to do fourth quarter, this summer, and in the fall. You had a question. Oh my God, why did it just escape me? Your final question. What was your final question?
The fun part, outdoor classrooms.
Outdoor. Now, I know Jeff has been working on some more work around outdoor, and I don't know if we're ready for a full-fledged presentation today, but we could incorporate that in one of the future RTSs between now and the end of this year. Jeff, do you want to make any broad comments or just wait for a future work session?
Well, just real briefly, Dr. Raymond, yeah, we have expanded that conversation, and we've included instructional services through the Get to Green. So we've really gone ahead and pushed it. And I think Ms. Tolan knows a lot more as well, because she and many of the other school board members have been pushing this. But yeah, it's moving forward. It is something that's a part of our quiver of options and opportunities. And we're really kind of excited that the weather's getting to the point to be conducive to entertain it as well. That's all I'll say for now.
Okay, I'll wait for more on the edge of my seat. Thank you.
Let's see, Ms. Pekarsky, followed by Ms. Laura Jane Cohen.
Thank you, Ms. Tolan. Many of my concerns and questions have actually been addressed. So I will just talk a little bit about summer school. A concern that I also had when I saw this was staffing, and have we sent out any preliminary surveys to teachers to kind of gauge, are we going to be prepared to actually roll this out? Have we done that yet?
Very good question, Ms. Pekarsky. In the past, when we've done summer programs that have been more centralized, only at a few sites, we would take a more centralized approach. But this is going to be school specific. Every school will have a program. So the principals at the local schools are in that recruitment process and having those conversations with teachers now. And they started that process already, and they were very proactive about saying, you know, we need to know as soon as possible when we can do that, because people need to get these things on their schedule. So the principals are working on it.
Okay, that's good to hear. The summer school, I was disappointed, and you know, maybe it's just I need to understand this a little bit better, that while we know that our ESOL students have been disproportionately affected, negatively affected this year, we didn't have any specific summer school opportunities for those students. I know they're going to be lumped in, but you know, that's still just 15 days of potential remediation, acceleration help. So can you speak a little bit as to how you made that decision not to stand up something specifically for our ESOL students?
Well, thanks for raising that as well. I failed to mention, every one of the programs will have a robust English language development component to it to serve English language learner students. So that is something that's just part of the design of the regular program. And it's very much in accordance with how we do our English language development, being embedded within the curriculum as well as separate explicit instruction. So it will have both components. We're hiring ESOL teachers for our programs, and we will have some specialized programs at the high school level to accelerate English language learners' English language skills. So we will have both.
Okay, thank you. The potential virtual option for taking the SOLs, will that be accessible to everybody, including students who may need those for verifiable credits?
So
Graduation?
Yeah, students that need verified credits, our understanding right now is that those students probably are going to need to test in person. So we're still getting all of that information worked out with the state, but verified credits most likely are going to have to be done in person.
Okay, excellent. I did, the questions obviously, and this has come up, are around the 4 days. And, I think anybody who saw the Fauci interview kind of read between the lines that guidance is going to be changing to the 3 feet. And people are looking at us to, really move along with that. And I understand a lot of the issues that we have around doing so. And as we are looking to identify students that may be able to come in for the 4 days, something that I've heard from many parents, and actually something that I made the decision for my own students to keep them home because 2 days was too disruptive to their routine to go back and forth, in my opinion. But if there's 4-day options now, I've already had some parents reach out to me and say, well, wait a minute. If I knew it was going to be a 4-day, I would have made a very different decision than what I've made now with a 2-day. So, I don't know. I want to put that out there for your consideration. I don't know how you're going to handle that. I do think what Ms. Marin said, when we're looking at this K-12, K-6 is very different than, our secondary students. So if anybody could address that a little bit, I'd appreciate it.
Well, Stella, I think you're naming something huge. It's like the butterfly effect, right? The wings of a butterfly can change the world. I mean, if you go from 2 days to 4 days, you're going to have tons of people who would say, wait a second, right? We've spent months planning. We've had a very, I think, overall very seamless transition of 100,000 kids. And now do we want to spend the next 2 or 3 months all running around again to put together the jigsaw puzzle and to do it safely, or focus on the learning where the kids are based on the choices families made? We really have to ask ourselves, is scrambling the decks or scrambling the desk, if you will, in a class, or the decks on a ship, is that the focus as we lean into the finish? We're proposing a targeted focus on the kids who most need in person to get across the finish line of this school year. Then the pivot to that full day in person, either in the summer in person for sure. And again, we'll know, we don't know yet. I mean, I'm not holding on a secret today that CDC is going to tell us tomorrow or next week. It could be next month. We've got graduation to plan. We've got tons of other things to do, and we've just got to decide our capacity to do them and do them well at the level of expectation that this board and community has and should have for us. So I do believe the approach that we brought you keeps a focus on the most vulnerable kids who needs that extra work or extra time in person. We'll get it subject to our capacity limits, whatever they are. And that's my best thinking at this time.
My time's up.
Ms. Cohen.
Thank you. I'm happy to follow that. I've been really grateful to watch what our principals and our APs have done over these last few weeks of trying to do all of the work to track down kids and families who selected in person but then didn't show up. And so really trying to do the investigative work truthfully of figuring out if these kids are going to come back. I have one school that about 12% of the kids who said they were coming back just didn't show back up. And so the work that staff has done to try to make sure that it's a choice and not that there was misunderstanding or anything like that has been tough work. And so I'm so appreciative of all that the staff has done to try to make sure that those folks are choosing then to stay virtual so that they can open up more of those slots. And I appreciate the community's patience, because I know that must be frustrating, in waiting to make sure that those families reconfirm that they're going to stay. But I also appreciate that we have, teachers who are, coming in at 6 o'clock in the morning and rearranging, remeasuring, their entire classrooms because, a parent changed, their mind. And I think that the schools have been, as accommodating as humanly possible. I understand as a parent, this is such a hard choice. I will tell you, as a family, we really went back and forth. But I do appreciate that what we're looking to do is figure out who wants to be there, doing our best to get them, in, but then also seeing what space is there and how we can best accommodate, some of our students. I know at one of my schools, we have a student who's homeless. And when you want to talk about what the needs are versus some other kids, I'm really grateful for the flexibility that you've given to our principals to know their community, and then help make the best choices for those kids. In that vein, 2 questions. One is, I'm very concerned about that we see, more and more folks who want to be in person, but we haven't seen SAC change in our building. So do you get any word from the county about, is SRS just going to stay the way it is for the rest of the year? And do you have assurances that we're going to wind up with our normal SAC program in the fall?
Mr. Smith, do you have any insights into that question?
So we don't have any insights into SAC for the fall, and my camera is trying to engage at this point. But we do know that we've had some discussions about what SAC possibly looks like for the summer. So as we think about students coming back to the summer, I think that it's baby steps with the county and having these conversations. But we haven't gotten a full picture of what it looks like for the fall.
We might be able to do that in a future RTS work session, and really, because I know SAC is going to be a question on many parents' minds. So we can flag that for a future work session update.
That would be awesome.
RTS
Yeah.
update.
For some, it's definitely the difference between being able to stay in public or wind up in some sort of private setting.
Okay.
That would be great. And if there's any advocacy that you need with us, with the Board of Supervisors, let us know. The other is, I'm worried about how we're talking about the virtual for next year, given what we know with the vaccine. So I just wondered if you could expound a little bit on what you had said about potentially, is this a conversation about expanding homebound? How do we deal with that?
Yeah, I don't know what the rest of the team would say. I share what's in my mind, right? I'm telling you, these are just emerging thoughts. I know for some, concurrent is a word that no one wants to ever use again. And I just want to offer a note of caution that we need to really look at that tool before we throw it away and say never again. I do think the concurrent tool may be a tool that we want to keep as part of our tool to connect kids. But I do think this, as Sloan said, Dr. Presidio said, we've got to work with teachers and principals and our parents and our stakeholders and provide guidance. I'm not at all saying concurrent for every kid, concurrent like it was this year, but I'm not sure we're ready to just walk away from a platform we've given our elementary, middle, and high school kids and say we would never use it. I really think we have to have a careful discussion, and we'll bring you our best thinking, and we need to do that. But I do think concurrent may have applications post-pandemic that will be a win for kids, and it'll be a win for teachers. Remember, in the old days, when a kid was gone 2 weeks, I had to sit around and try to do lesson plans for a kid or make up the work on the way back. So I think it's looking at the work differently and how we can keep a kid in connection through technology. And one thing, just a quick comment. One of the things we just heard from kids this week, I met with our student advisory students. They want more now that they've lived this pandemic. They want more student collaboration tools through technology. So they don't want technology completely to go away. Their perfect world is in person with a supplement, right? A supplement of that virtual collaboration with kids, not with adults having always to be there. So I think we've got to even think about what does our future instructional model look like that has these blends and flavors that we've never considered. We've given out our vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry for 45 years. And I think now it's about looking really at what are the other options, the other flavors we can give kids that will keep them more engaged. And I think we've really got to explore that with our folks and bring you back at the end of this year, lessons learned and what does the way forward. And if you read articles, people are all trying to say, what does the post-pandemic K-12 world look like? And I just don't want people leaving today that concurrent is the dinosaur that dies when this pandemic dies. There may be benefits to kids and actually our educators to keeping it with a proper role, a proper context, and proper guidance.
Okay, Ms. Omesh, and then following Ms. Omesh, we'll have Ms. Dernak Fairfax, Mr. Frisch, then Nathan Anabudo, and then myself. So Ms. Omesh.
Thank you. First of all, thank you to staff for putting this together. And, it's great to obviously see how mitigation has been effective. And it's been really encouraging, especially to look at school-based data in how it's been playing out. I had a question about the summer school situation. We had talked before about doing a fifth quarter. Where did that conversation shift and how did we end up with this kind of programming?
Sure, and Dr. Presidio, I invite you to add in, but what I would tell you is that no mark moving into summer school becomes your fifth quarter, right? The old days is that's your fourth quarter grade, that's your final grade. The no mark lets you have summer school as that fifth quarter. You don't get that F. You get the grade you get in summer school. And it's completely, it's never even put on your transcript. So I don't know, Dr. Presidio, would you explain it or share it differently?
No, I think that's a good explanation.
Okay.
So are kids going to be automatically enrolled in this program?
Well, we can't compel students to attend in the summer, but we definitely are going to make those personalized invitations to students and families for those students that would benefit. And we do expect that most of them will choose to enroll.
We're looking too, Ms. Omesh, at how to handle, what's the process for the no mark, right, Dr. Presidio? Is it an automated? Is it a student generated?
Yeah, our intention is to have the no mark be auto-generated. That's correct. So if a student was if a student was not passing class by the end of fourth quarter, their transcript would just be populated with the no mark, and then they can continue in summer in up to 2 courses during the summer, kind of as a fifth term to complete that class and earn the grade. And if they don't do that, if they choose not to do that, then they would need to either repeat the course the following year and have the grade replaced, or possibly repeat it in a future summer program.
So is this only for kids who were at below a certain mark then?
So our high school program is really a credit recovery program. So it really is going to be focused on the students at the high school level that did not pass the courses and need more time to complete the courses. Our programs at elementary and middle, since we don't award credit, those are going to be more acceleration programs in literacy and math. And then, we have some of those specialized programs, obviously, in special ed, some of the ESOL services, and then the bridge to kindergarten and the bridge to first grade. But high school really is a credit recovery program to give students more time to earn those credits towards graduation.
Yeah. So I mean, what I'm hearing is it's not exactly like a quarter. I mean, what limited us from extending the school year, basically?
Well, if you were going
We've
to,
been talking, for a while about this fifth quarter, and it's going to be like school to make up for the time.
yeah, I think, basically as we've been talking about it before, the central idea was to allow students who needed the additional time to have additional time to meet their learning goals and their credit requirement goals at the high school level. If you were going to stand up a fifth quarter program for all students, obviously that would be at a whole different scale. It would require, staff to be required to work during the summer, which again, it's a staff choice whether or not they choose to work during the summer because they're not on contract. They would be on an extended summer contract at that point. So, that would be a completely different scope and scale than what we had been planning, which was to have those fifth quarter like services for the students who needed them.
Yeah, I think that's the piece where, that's why was that explored? Like, did we look at that as a possibility? Because that's kind of what we've been promising for a while.
What I'd say, Ms. Omesh, is I brought it up on the General Assembly call. The fifth quarter is an idea. And as we went back and tried to operationalize it, I think an additional day for every teacher is $6-7 million. So that's 1 week is $30 million. And you start to go through a lot of money all at once. Not every student needs that fifth quarter. Not every teacher wants to work that fifth quarter. And we took a blend. We took the best of the idea. You get a no mark. You don't have a final score, and you get to go to summer school to get it done. And so it really is an innovation not to be saddled with an F grade and a chance to get it better.
Have we considered whether we can do that as opt-out rather than opt-in?
I don't know. I guess we could take a look at that. I think part of it will be staffing and something some other board members have said, how to not have our teachers so exhausted that no one wants to come forward, even when we need our very strongest teachers to be with us this summer, right? We're asking some of our staff for 2 straight summers of really round the clock work. And we need that given where we are. And, I would say the opt-in, opt-out would have to be something we'd have to go back and look at, and it may staffing could be an issue.
Yeah, I mean, because we can end up with a situation where, there have already been all kinds of access barriers that have led kids to not perform in the way that we'd expect, and we don't even really need the data to know that they've been struggling. And it's the same filter. Like in this situation, they're gonna have to sign in or sign up for this thing. I mean, how are we going to ensure that everyone knows about it? We've already not been able to reach certain kids, right? Or like certain kids didn't even fill out the survey months ago. I mean, we know this happens in a system this big.
Well, Ms. Omesh, the one nugget is, though, remember, if you get an F, we're looking at an automated system to make it a no mark. So even if you don't do summer school, you're not carrying that F. And we're going to do that, not having to wait for the kid to do it.
Right, but the mark doesn't mean the kid is academically prepared or equipped or, right?
Right.
Yeah, so I would urge us to consider that. And I also, what have we thought of in terms of language barriers and all this stuff to make sure kids are signed up? Like, what are we doing on that front?
Well, we can bring you updates for that at the next meeting. I don't know if Dr. Presidio, if you had anything you wanted to share now, we can certainly talk about our summer school in April.
I mean, these will be individual conversations with the student and the family in the student and family's first language, if students are identified as needing the summer program. So it's not like we're just going to send an email. Those would be individual conversations with the family.
Yeah, I think I would advocate that, I don't think a kid needs to have Fs for them to be able to benefit from a program like this. And, I really would push us to think about opt out, at least for maybe certain groups or whatever. Okay, I want to echo also what Stella mentioned about ESOL. I think that's, we're seeing significant gaps, and providing more robust support would certainly be beneficial. And I have a question about how we're prioritizing who gets access to in-person this year. So not just next year, but we're talking about doing 4 days for certain kids. Months ago, we defaulted everyone to virtual, right, who didn't fill out the survey. So what are we seeing right now in terms of kids who want to come back, but whose school doesn't have the capacity?
You know, I don't know whether we have anyone here who wants to speak to that question in detail. That may be something we'll have to have staff follow up on and get back to you.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most prudent thing. I would say, though, it varies by school. And we are trying to collect school by school level data on a weekly basis so we can see those trends and patterns. Overall, just so everybody knows, division-wide, there's a preference for virtual. 53% of our families are virtual, 47% are in person. And that trend has trended more towards virtual than towards in-person in the last several weeks. But we know that's not the case at every school. And definitely many of our schools do have wait lists of families who would like to attend in person if possible. But we are trying to provide that information and review that information on a school by school basis.
Yeah, I think for upcoming return to school and just in our planning, it's essential to know that because, you know, before prioritizing the kids who are already in person for 4 days, we ought to think about the kids who were defaulted to virtual and want to come back for 2 days, right? So that's something I would really push us to look at. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Dernack-Kofax? Oh, Tammy, I think you're muted. No, I can't hear you.
Tammy, I'll call you on my cell phone.
Okay, maybe while they're getting that organized, Mr. Anabuda, would you like to proceed? We can hear you. Okay, we can hear you.
All right, thank you.
A little extra.
Tammy, you have to mute your computer.
I do not know why this continues to happen. No, I'm going to sign out. Carl, you go.
All right. Have we just established that it's my turn? I think that's where we are.
I'm sorry, Mr. Frisch, my computer just went down, so I think I may be back, but you go ahead.
All right. So I guess I'll start with, I was encouraged to hear that our summer offering will be about 10 times larger than we've previously done, and that we're actively working to sign up teachers as we speak. Are we doing the same for support personnel? And will we require the same volume of extra support personnel like we are with teachers, about 10 times as many as normal?
We are recruiting the support personnel to include, leadership positions, classroom, instructional support positions, specialists. So yeah, we are actively in the recruiting process, and all of those will be significant staffing increases to what we would have previously or normally provided.
Gotcha. We talked quite a bit about 3 feet of social distancing, what our health partners might suggest in the future. I don't want it to be left unsaid that, or unasked. Are we actively preparing scenarios for what it would look like to return 5 days a week with 3 feet or whatever is ultimately, recommended? We're not just sitting on our hands waiting for the guidance.
That's correct. We're reviewing that, and we're looking at the 3-foot capacity in every school, what that looks like in terms of number of students in a classroom. And even at 3 feet, there are some challenges that we'll have to work out. And again, none of us have the COVID crystal ball. Who knows what the number of feet will be in the fall. But we know that we believe 3 feet will be, I believe very strongly that 3 feet will be allowed clearly from the CDC by this fall. And we need to be prepared to use that to be in 5 days in person this fall.
And are we using any of the current data that we have on student selections to inform our thinking about what will be needed at various schools? For example, I have a high school in my district where initially 70% chose in person. I have another high school in my district where it was roughly 50-50 and maybe a little bit more virtual.
Right.
Clearly, that doesn't necessarily tell us where people would be in the fall for 5 days a week, but it probably indicates to us that we'll have more people who want in person at the one school than at the other.
Yeah, I think we're starting to do some of that. We really have to do more outreach, and we're talking with our principals now over the next couple of months. We need to talk to our community that has remained virtual and find out their reasons. And part of it, I believe, honestly, Mr. Frisch, is it's disproportionately impacted our communities, particularly our communities of color. And when you've experienced COVID up close and personal with impacts to your family and your community and your living area, it makes you feel different about going in anywhere. And so we've got to respect that and meet people where they are and get them, even in fourth quarter, if families that are virtual don't come back for in-person instruction, there may be in-person opportunities to connect now and over the summer that help build confidence, including sharing the data, but also just the personal connection. And, you know, we need to do that. I am also hopeful, and I don't have anything today. I am hopeful that the momentum around vaccinations will continue and will be extended to include school-age children. And I would love to see a massive campaign like we did with our staff to be able to get our young people who are eligible to be vaccinated. I do believe that would be the second game changer for reopening schools as close to normal this fall. But we've got to wait on the science and our health professionals, but we want to talk, and we're starting to talk about how we could be prepared to make that happen as quickly as possible, like we did as a school system for our staff.
And just to be clear, we're not that we would have to vaccinate students in order for them to return, only that it might make some families more comfortable.
Exactly. Exactly.
So I agree generally that we need to do a better sales job to the community, a sales pitch to the community about returning for in person. But in order to sell something, you need more detail, right? So one of the things that will help us is learning more about the 5-day-a-week plan. 5 days per week plan. Can you give us an idea of what we can expect to be fleshed out for this plan at the April meeting? And perhaps we should stop calling it the return to school update, since we've returned students to school even part-time.
Right. I guess we'll have to decide what we keep calling the monthly updates. We need to bring you between now and over the next few months. It's hard to say this. It's not hard to say this, but each month is the new next tranche of work to get done, right? To get Fairfax ready. I don't have the 100-page plan for 5 days in person yet, but we're starting it, and we will bring you as much as we can get done in the next 21 days and try to give some people a break at spring break. And we know, and I totally agree, Mr. Frisch, the more detail we bring earlier, the more we'll be able to sell people to sign on the dotted line sooner.
And the more questions we can get answered. For example, when we talk about reducing social distancing to 3 feet, that's not the only change that comes with reducing social distancing. Okay, we've changed it to 3 feet from 6 feet. That's it. That's all we had to change to get people in 5 days a week. A lot of things have to change that go along with that change in social distancing. what equipment are we going to have to buy to make that even safer? What mitigation strategies do we need to lean into to make that workable? How do we have to train staff on those things? These are the types of questions we're going to have when y'all bring a more formalized plan. For example, on virtual schooling, you've said that it'll be more limited and school-based. What does that actually mean to the end user? What does it mean to a family to tell them that it'll be more limited and school-based compared to what they have now and compared to what they previously had?
Understood.
That was not a rhetorical question. Any detail you can give on that would be great.
Well, what I have to have the community understand, this is our final day of bringing 8 groups back that we planned for 6 months. And I don't have all the answers for what the fall looks like yet. I'll give you everything we have, and we have been laying ourselves on the line for this school system and community. I am so proud of our staff. I cannot clearly articulate to you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for a year, people have died and bled for this system. And we are doing our very best. And I know you know this, and I know everybody does, but I have got to stand up for my staff and folks who are beginning to wither under it's not enough every time we come. We're giving you our very best, and we will have more to give and share. But we just brought 100,000 kids back safely, and we need to celebrate for just a moment before the next tranche of work. And you haven't done this, or this is not done yet. And I know that's not what you're saying, Mr. Frisch, because
I don't want people to think that I'm not appreciative or that we don't occasionally get a little bit more out of you at a meeting like this than is in the presentation, which is why we do ask more probing questions.
Right.
I've already gone over my time, so I apologize.
No, and Ms. Fairfax, when one thing's been accomplished, what's the next? And that's a great part of our system, but we also, we have to just balance and continue to pace ourselves so that we can give you the high quality work I know you want and the answers that parents need to plan for the fall. But I'll tell you this, I'm a parent, I'm a superintendent, and we will have plans to have a strong 5-day in-person plan, and we will win back all of our families to in-person, I believe, between now and the first day of school this fall. And we'll bring you the work, and we'll make the case, and we will sell it with your help to this community. Thanks, Mr. Frisch.
Thank you, both of you. Ms. Derna Kofax, can we try your microphone?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, I'm not going to turn on my camera because that seems to cause problems. And I've had this fixed 3 times and it's not fixed. So it's very, very frustrating. This is a new computer. I am happy to follow the tail end of what I heard Scott say, because I think it is very important that they hear that from you, Scott. I think it's extremely important that our staff, our teachers, understand how they are appreciated, because oftentimes, because we have pivoted, because we have turned so many times, they don't feel that. And I continue to hear that from some of the teachers who live and the staff who live in my district, who work in my district, and are constituents of mine. So I think it's very, very important. You can't say that enough, and we can't say how appreciative we are of the many, many changes that we've asked them to go through and pull through, and they keep changing and keep giving us more. So I think that's really important to know. And I do appreciate your proposed strong start to the new school year. I would be reticent to support any big changes for the last quarters other than your targeted approach, because as others have described, and as I see here in my district, some families have embraced coming back, but in my district, only 1/3 to less than 1/2 of my families have chosen to remain virtual, have chosen to come back. They've chosen to remain virtual. So, and many, when I talk to them, because many have reached out to me, and they are citing continuity of learning. They are citing, my kid has been doing this for several months now, and this is where our comfort level is, and this is why we want to remain. I don't want to uproot my child. So I think it's important that we hear and we understand that that is where about half of our parents are right now. Again, I agree with the target approach. I do have a question, and Carl might have talked about this, but I know we're assuming that the 6 feet distancing mitigation strategy is going to be lifted in favor of 3 feet. But I believe you had stated, in one of your interviews, it could have been the CNN one, that you couldn't do high schools if you were to maintain the 6 feet. Is that's true, correct?
High schools are going to be challenging. Some of our high schools are going to be challenging even at 3 feet. In every classroom. We're going to have to either look at the class size cap, or we're going to have to look at very creative use, which you all have already talked about, of outdoor spaces, large rooms to make 3 feet work. And we have teams that are going back now with principals to take the analysis of 3 feet the way we did 6 feet back last fall.
Okay. What would that mean for the buses?
Miss Darnat Koufax, you're always so candid, and I want to be candid with you. Right now, our protocol at 1 seat to a bus is about 3 feet. It's probably just a skosh under 3 feet.
Right.
So we're going to need to share the data from our transportation. We're going to be looking, I'm very curious, as Ms. McLaughlin said, I want to see the transportation data from state and national districts, or whether we saw transmission, where the transmission in schools occurred, so that we can be making sure we have the appropriate strategies or enhancing the strategies that we have. But transportation may be something else we're going to have to look at as we prepare for 5 days in the fall. One of the nuggets right now, and Jeff, Mr. Planenberg, speak up if you'd like. I've visited some schools. A lot of parents have chosen to still really use the kiss and ride option and drop their kids off in their cars. And so we're going to really have to sell transportation on a school bus as well, as part of what Mr. Frisch was talking about. Mr. Planenberg, anything you'd want to share there?
Only Dr. Braber, what you said is spot on. I mean, if you have all the students seated in the classroom, you can fit most of the students in our classrooms, but they don't come automatically seated. And the clashes and conflict are areas in secondary, the cafeteria, the science lab. And so what Dr. Braber said is correct. We're going to have to be creative in those areas, and we've got a team pulled together that Dr. Presidio mentioned. The transportation will be a challenge. But as was stated, if you sit down and measure from your nose 3 feet over, that's what we're talking about with 3 feet to somebody else's nose. And that really gives you about 18 inches. So it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, Mr. Koufax, here's a nugget for you. I know you all like nuggets. And Ms. McLaughlin was asking me, I had forgotten this. And I will verify for sure. But as I understand it, and Jeff, maybe Falls Church is putting kids 2 to a seat as part of the 5-day return, not just 1 to a seat, which was already lower than the guidance that we had received from the VDH this fall. Jeff, do you know that for sure, confirmation?
I'm sorry, Dr. Brennan, I don't know for sure on that, but that's what I've heard.
Yeah, I will verify that. So that would be a, Marty, do you know that for sure, Mr. Smith?
I've only heard that. I've heard it through unofficial channels, but I can verify.
All right, we'll verify. And we need to be looking at districts, to be honest, that have doubled up on transportation and what other mitigation strategies they put in place. So those are all things that we need to begin to start working on as we pivot to the kind of planning that we need to do to make the fall as smooth as this return to school has been this last month.
Right, because that was our concern, and then we knew we weren't currently following the 6 feet mitigation strategies, even on the bus. And there's no way, I don't think you could, you said you'll be creative, but that it means a full school bus. I don't see how you can do that because we're not in a position.
I think it would be 2 to a bus. I mean, 2 to a seat.
2 to a seat. There's no other way. I just want to speak a little bit on virtual instruction. And again, because we often, virtual instruction obviously has been maligned by some of the loudest voices, but I continue to hear from families that virtual options have been working for their child's learning style. So I absolutely think we could and need to, we could and should look at how could we look at virtual options outside the pre-COVID learning, schematic? What can virtual learning look like in the future to benefit those kids who really found, for whatever reason, that's where their sweet spot is, even if they did it as a hybrid in and out. And I know that's a big ask, but I think that is one lesson we can take away from this learning that we've done, that this might work for some people a little bit better for a multitude of reasons.
Well, those are the conversations we're having. And one thing too, Mr. Annette Koufax, around virtual, the state is expanding its virtual options for next year, including at the elementary level and at the secondary level. So we are looking carefully at those options as well. We'll have more to say in the months ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Anabudo?
Hi, Ms. Tolan. Thank you. I'm gonna try to have my camera on because my connection was good in class today. So we're gonna hope this works. First, I just want to say thank you. I have a couple of comments that I want to make, just in general about the situation in the PowerPoint at the end. But there are a couple questions that I want to ask and make sure I get to in my time. So I'm going to start with those. Dr. Brabrand, do you know, this is a very specific question to seniors that I've got a couple of times. Do you know what the requirements are for verified credits for seniors this year? How that has changed specifically in regard to the student quote unquote selected test? Because we know that some SOL requirements have been waived for our class, but the student selected test is also a requirement that many seniors were expecting to fill this year through, like, let's say econ or kids who don't take DECA,
right,
whatever that is for seniors. Do we know what the deal with that requirement is?
That's a great question. Wow, that's a great question. And I'm going to defer real quick to see Dr. Presidio. Do we know that answer for the student selected test and verified credit?
Unfortunately, I don't want to give the wrong information on that. I really feel like I should probably get a final answer from our director of student testing.
Okay. I think we know, but I don't think we want to promise it here live and then give students wrong information.
That's correct.
Nathan, Dr. Presidio nor I would want to have pie on our face as a result of answering a question incorrectly. But I know you would know nothing about pieing the superintendent, of course.
We will avoid a pie situation, okay. Dr. Berber.
All right. We'll have a quick answer, though. Quicker than you can come up with a cream pie, we'll have an answer to verified credit.
Okay. Look forward to it. Secondly, I was just hoping for maybe this is not, maybe there isn't an answer. Maybe I missed it. Maybe there was an answer. Maybe we don't have the answer yet. But is there a specific plan to have virtual option for families next year who haven't bought in to in-person learning yet? I know we're not standing up, where the conversation is about standing up more virtual options for retire, but for COVID reasons, are there going to be virtual options for families who don't want to be back in person in the fall?
Well, I think health concerns are still going to be a part of the conversation for virtual. And I shared that today. Beyond that, I'm not in a place to say. Okay. One thing I would say, if we truly believe in equity and we look at the data, we need our most impacted communities who've been the most impacted by COVID. We need to show them and share with them that schools are safe. And that's why it's a careful walk. We can't rush back to 5 days in person and compromise the safety and the confidence that it can be done safely and responsibly, because those are the communities most impacted, where COVID has been a threat of life and death. are the ones that we most have to work to sell to bring back. And so that's one of the tension points I think that's going on right now. We've got to continue to build community confidence that it's safe to return. And the truth is, we need the great majority of our students. Yes, some kids did do better, and we need to keep that in mind. But many of our most impacted kids, our most vulnerable kids, did worse. And we need them back 5 days if we're going to help get them where they need to be for the rest of their educational career.
I really appreciate that response, Dr. Brabrand, and that will take me kind of the comments I want to make in regard to the PowerPoint. And one of the central themes that I saw throughout it that made me extremely happy. And I want to echo my pride in the staff in the school system. It made me smile when you were saying that. I'm thankful to everyone. And something that made me also smile in the department was the central theme of support for students. You know, there were 3 things that stood out to me, and I kind of just want to speak on them, and that's academic supports, SEL supports, and then the supportive routine. The first one, the academic supports, we saw Dr. Brabrand and his staff brought forth to us, to the community, grading policy changes for seniors. And I particularly really appreciated your comments, Dr. Brabrand, around grading in context. I think a lot of times we talk about grades, we don't talk about the context behind those grades. And I think the policy supports you've brought to this board really allow us to add some context to contextualize the grades that students will be receiving throughout this really challenging time that students have been learning and really trying to thrive in. So that made me really happy, as well as the summer school, the credit recovery, the no mark stuff that will allow us to also expand academic supports beyond just this confined virtual environment and into the new normal as we move towards in-person learning into the summer and fall. So I really appreciated that. And secondly, the SEL supports, graduation, return to sports. We have prom, we talked about in-person, return to in-person schooling. All those 3, the social emotional learning supports, extremely important and made me smile because I saw that we were doing it successfully as well. And then the third thing was the supportive routine. And I'll just finish by saying that students have gone through a lot of change and a lot of trauma this school year. And the measured return to learn that we're starting to see from this school system is one thing that students have been able to depend on. So with that.
Thank you, Mr. Anabudo. I will make at this point a couple of comments, and then it's already going to be 4 p.m., but I think let me make my comments and we'll check in with Mr. Frisch, who's been keeping track of our colleagues that want to go back. I'm just going to start with the fall and work backwards, I guess. I am super excited that we've, made this, I guess, formal announcement today that we're going to be going, 5 days in the fall. We've been talking about it for, quite some time over the last couple of months, and I'm, really excited that that's where we are. As I've been out to schools the last couple of weeks, I don't know who's more excited, the kids or the teachers or the administrators. And I just want to thank everyone for the work that they've done and the enthusiasm that they've put into it. I hope everyone also along those lines saw the Washington Post article over the weekend entitled "Why Teachers Will Save Our Schools from the Pandemic's Ravages," and really talks about the creativity and the energy of teachers and how, they're going to be doing the things that Dr. Presidio was talking about, all of these assessments and things as we move forward over the next months to see where our kids are and figure out who really needs the help and, what help we need to provide to them. So I can't thank our staff out in the schools enough for all of that work. I do want to just echo some of the previous comments. Looking forward to more information on virtual and what we might be able to offer for those families next fall. And also agree wholeheartedly with Ms. Seisler-Heiser that we virtually need a long-term option and a short-term option. Short-term just taking care of some of these health effects, but we've had some great conversations on long-term how we can utilize this technology to help a whole variety of students over the years. I'm interested in to look at summer. I would really like, as we've talked about, we're using the MTSS process to look at what students will be offering summer programs to. I would like to maybe get a little bit more information on, how that might work so families can understand that. But also just want to, put in a plug for, I've heard from lots and lots of different families with, students that are doing well, so maybe students that are, and they just feel like need a little bit of a nudge over the summer. If we can really work to even just provide our families a list of resources, area camps and things that they may want to take advantage of, state level resources, whether they're hard copy or, virtual, so that those are really available for families that want to take advantage of things like that and may not necessarily want to sign up for weeks of summer school. But I don't know, Dr. Prasidi, if you could talk a little bit more about that MTSS process so families just have a better idea of who is included in that process. Like, is it only kids with IEPs, or, how does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the MTSS process looks at any student in the school to identify students who might have additional learning or, social emotional support needs. I think for families that, are wondering whether or not their students would be invited to the summer programs, I guess what I would say is, right now, look at those dates that were published on the slide in this presentation so that folks know when those programs are going to run and they have those dates kind of in mind. If they have questions, reach out directly to their teachers and to counselors right now. But we still have more than a quarter of the school year to go. So we're not at a point where we can make final decisions about who needs those summer learning opportunities. We do need to spend a little bit more time and get deeper into fourth quarter before we can make those formal recommendations. But the process itself, again, an interdisciplinary team of teachers, leaders in the building, resource teachers, counselors, social workers, take a holistic look at students. Again, using assessment data, using teacher recommendations, and also taking into consideration things that they might be hearing directly, obviously from the students or from the families. All of those components and criteria that will be part of the guidelines that schools will use to identify kids that would need those summer learning opportunities. And then the invitations will come directly from the school. And that will happen later in fourth quarter. We're not at that point yet, but people can at least put those dates on their calendar if they want to try to plan around some of those dates. We are also going to put together materials like we did last summer that will mail directly home to all families, grade level specific summer kind of continuity learning materials. So, we will be providing some hard copy learning materials. Students will also have access to some of the digital tools and resources that they've been using during asynchronous learning this year in the summer to support continuity of learning as well.
Can you talk a little bit about that MTSS process also just for determining who might get more time in school this spring? Would it be the same?
Yeah, it's the same process. The MTSS teams meet on a regular basis, at least on a weekly basis, to review student concerns that are coming up. So it would be the same process that's used in the spring to identify students who might need additional time or up to 4 days of in-person learning.
All right, my time went fast. Mr. Frisch, I'll let you take it from here.
All right, we are just over 4 p.m. and before we continue, I'd like to get a sense of the board on an extension of time as to whether we will add an extra hour here to facilitate go-backs. I don't want to do this without the consent of the board. So let's go ahead if you would like to extend by an hour to facilitate. Yes.
Hi, this is Megan McLaughlin. I wanted to offer an alternative to what you're suggesting.
Okay.
I would suggest that perhaps by extending 12 minutes to 18 minutes maximum, board members simply give a 60 to 90 second closing thoughts to each other. This is our work session, and this way, we've heard a lot from staff, but we need to.
I gotcha. Folks, we'll do that first, and if it doesn't pass, I'll ask the second question. So if you are in favor of extending by 12 minutes, give or take seconds, so that everybody can have a parting 1 minute before we wrap things up, please go ahead and raise your hand. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight. We've got 8, and that's clearly a majority. 9, 10. So a hefty majority of folks. So we will go ahead and give people a closing minute, and I'm going to go back to the order that, well, I had 4 people who have.
I apologize. It's Ms. Lasmar-Heiser. I have a question. I thought we were voting on both one at a time because some may want to go for the full hour. But well, some may still want to go for the full hour because some may still have questions for staff that doesn't get. So I didn't realize that a 12-minute vote would then preclude the hour. I just thought was the.
Well, that's what I said. So I'll go ahead and ask, but I think that.
I apologize. It didn't come across.
Clearly, I wasn't. I apologize. All right. So if you'd like to continue for an hour, go ahead and raise your hand. All right. That's 4 folks. So we will go ahead and proceed with the 1-minute comments. I had 4 people who had signed up for go backs affirmatively, not that that means that other people didn't want them. But we will go ahead and revert back to the order in which we selected people at the beginning. Ms. Corbett-Sanders, you'd be up first.
Thank you. With my 60 seconds, I just want to make a plea that if at all possible, we focus on bringing our youngest learners back into our buildings for more time as a prioritization, because we know that some of our youngest learners are the ones that are struggling with the online platforms the most. And secondly, I wanted to ask the superintendent for more clarity as to how they're ensuring that we are having an inclusive approach to inviting people back for the summer programming, because many of our students may be passing the litmus test of grades, but need to have some of that summer programming based on social emotional supports and the need to reestablish relationships with peers and teachers. So how are you going to ensure fidelity with a broader invite at the school level, having delegated it to the school level?
Ms. Corbett-Sanders, we had voted to do 1 minute each. Would you mind putting that as a next step for a question to be answered?
I didn't realize that meant that there weren't going to be any.
That's what it would mean for a 12-minute extension of the meeting, right? Each of us would get 60 seconds.
Okay.
Thank you. Up next, we have Ms. McLaughlin.
Yes, I had actually said for 90 seconds, but we are where we are. I would like to say in these 60 seconds, Dr. Braybrand, you've got Montgomery County, you've got Loudoun County, you've got Chesterfield County, you've got Henrico, you've got Isle of Wight. These are all Virginia schools following Virginia Department of Education guidance that they can go down to 3 feet. I don't think we should be waiting another month for your return to school. I think to what Mr. Frisch said, if the guidance from the Virginia Department of Health allows for us to accommodate 3 feet, we're just simply extending what we already promised our families. Dial up when it's safe, dial down when it's not. The families that want to be able to bring their kids in for more than 2 days, we need to be doing better. You cannot win people coming back into this school system if they don't even trust what we're doing in this final 4th quarter. We are woefully behind the other school divisions right here in the metro area, let alone the Commonwealth. I know you say everyone's working hard, and I am deeply appreciative, but it doesn't excuse at the headquarters level how we are so woefully behind other school divisions of our size and complexity. We need to do better.
Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin.
We are not woefully behind. That's the bottom line. We are not behind. We are not behind as a school system, and I disagree with that very strongly. We've been ahead on many things in this school system. We are not behind. That is not a true statement. Thank you.
Dr. Braybrand. Dr. Anderson.
I'm wasting my whole time trying to get my camera on. I do have a couple of questions, and very quickly, I do want to say I have questions regarding the role of Virtual Virginia. What does this mean moving forward? What does this mean this summer? And Dr. Brabrand, I do see a role for concurrent instruction to begin. You know, we've talked quite a bit about singleton classes in high schools, courses where we haven't enough staff. I see an opportunity there for us to really broaden our resources to be able to provide some access and some resources and opportunities to more of our students. I do want to definitely highlight that we continue to have bandwidth issues as we're going into this fourth quarter. Many of our schools have bandwidth issues and computers that are not working. I know, Mr. Smith, I brought this up to you before, but this continues as we're getting high schoolers back into the building and they're not able to log on in the building because the teacher says we haven't enough bandwidth. So I'd like for those things to be reviewed.
Thank you, Dr.
I'll stop right
Anderson.
there. Thank you.
All right, up next, we've got Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
Thank you. Just really briefly, I wanted to clarify ESY versus recovery services and why are they different lengths of days but the same dates, and also to clarify whether students can qualify for both ESY and recovery services since there are different criteria for both and how that would work. I think our families, our special education families, need a lot more answers on ESY recovery and all of those pieces. I'm concerned about the small number of special education students for those services, seeing as how we have 26,000 just with IEPs, but I think, I don't have right in front of me, there's 10,000 total, 4,000 ESY, 6,000 recovery services that are listed. And so I'm concerned what happens to the rest of the students. I do think that I'm concerned about what Dr. Brabrand said regarding prom and all-night grad party. If the governor's allowing 30% capacity or 1,000 for outdoor entertainment venues, why are we being limited to 25? And I think that'd be some good, I think it's important for our seniors who've lost so much. I want to put that out there. And if we're going to continue concurrent learning in some way, shape, or form, I would recommend we look at the ORSI report regarding the disconnect between student understanding of virtual learning and teacher understanding of what students is, and make sure we address that. And social emotional learning is needs to be addressed. That's my 60 seconds.
Thank you, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser. Up next, we have Ms. Marin.
Thank you. I want to stress the importance of clearly communicating all of the information that was shared today. There's a lot of things that parents are going to want to know and families. I think that the focus on our capacity is really right. We are dealing with children and we need adults who are feeling well mentally and physically to educate our children, and rushing back and changing things right now is not going to be safe and healthy for children. So I encourage us to stay the course, plan for fall, do everything we can to meet families where they're at, and just be very clear in our communications for that and for the summer.
Thank you, Ms. Marin. Up next, we have Ms. Pekarsky.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that I told Dr. Brabrand and staff some of the things that I'm hearing from my constituents, that they're very worried as we're getting more kids in, that the virtual options will not be as robust and their kids will not be getting that one-on-one as they have been before with teachers. So I want that, out there. I also wanted to share that many parents have told me, please don't look at the data of who's in class right now in person to mean anything beyond for the fall, beyond just the fact that they wanted their kids to have continuity. And they are very much looking forward to a 5-day fall option. And as Ms. Marin said, please use a communication. It's very difficult for our parents to look at surrounding jurisdictions, including Loudoun, who is now talking about a 4-day week, and understand why we cannot do that. And I know that there are operational constraints and many issues to take under account. But please communicate that to parents. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pekarsky. Ms. Cohen.
Sorry, I'm like Dr. Anderson, using my whole time on getting the camera on. No, I just echo that I want to ensure that our virtual kids are not losing out on the experience. Also, I want us to reframe our thinking about concurrent, because I want us to actually get good input from our teachers who are now using it. Some are using it very differently than others. And I will say, for a teacher who has one kid in person and 27 online, concurrent is a really different experience versus the half and half sort of idea, or primarily in person versus a few virtual. And I would think, if we're talking about some ideas of next year, that those who have a full house in person and limited kids virtually might, be our best resource for what this would look like potentially in the fall. But I just don't want us to forget about what, until kids are vaccinated, allowing parents some flexibility about virtual options in the fall, or a delayed, return for some of those folks. So that's my advocacy.
Thank you, Ms. Cohen. Up next, we have Ms. Omesh.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's worth really acknowledging that we've turned the corner in a lot of ways. We've pulled off something in a way that's been really positive. And it's always been about monitoring the research, the data, and the evolving situation, which has never been static, to kind of get us here. So I do want to commend staff for that. My one plug is equity. I think we can still do a lot better when it comes to notice, language, access, how we prioritize who comes back, who doesn't, and who gets to be in person. So I would just really urge that we take a thorough look at the various steps ahead, and especially the plans, which seem to have predictable kind of gaps or barriers that I think we can get ahead of, and hopefully make sure we're serving every kid, no matter who they are. So that's my plug, and I hope Dr. Braybrand and team, and Dr. Williams, you guys can really give that some thorough thought as we move into the weeks ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Omesh. Ms. Derenak-Kofax.
Thank you. And just as some of my previous colleagues have talked about, I think communication is going to be key as we continue to do this. As I referenced in my earlier comments, I'm very interested in seeing what a continued robust virtual option will allow for our parents. And just as was noted to us on this caring culture for student success, proactive family communication, that must occur. It must occur on a one-to-one basis, particularly for those students and families where English is their second language. And they, as Dr. Braybrand talked about, have seen it maybe more than other communities have seen COVID within their communities, because I can unfortunately speak from personal experience. It's very hard to move forward once you see that firsthand. So that has to be part of our caring culture as we move forward. Lots of people are excited, but lots of people are still frightened, and we must move forward cautiously for them.
Thank you, Ms. Derenak-Kofax. Tolan.
Thank you. Yes, again, super excited to be talking about 5 days in the fall, and look forward to continued information about that. I would encourage us to, as we're looking at, how we can possibly have some capacity for, some of our students to come in 4 days, to be as, hopefully as generous as possible with that, as we see availability school to school. And also just talking to different people. I mean, people have been going through huge transitions, whether it's staff or whether it's kids coming, back to school, 2 days in school, and then they go home, and then they're back online. I know we're being cognizant of that, but just to put a plug in for that too, to be, extra, sensitive to all of these transitions and help people out with that. Really want to help with advocacy for vaccinations for our children, later this summer before the fall. So happy to help with that. And also, if we can, maximize our opportunities for our partners, our PTAs, et cetera, to help us out with building our school communities and, working with them to make sure that that happens as much as possible. And I'll be visiting virtual classrooms. I'm going to throw that in there.
Thank you, Ms. Tolan. Mr. Anabudo.
Thank you, Mr. Frisch. I would just like to echo Ms. Tolan's plug about working with the community partners, parents, PTAs, PTSOs, to kind of ensure that we're building community as we talk about re-entering this next phase. They've been our biggest partners in helping to keep students online, engaged, and interactive. And we need to make sure that we're also partnering them as we talk about removing some of that trauma and moving into this new normal as we get back into the buildings. I think that will be extremely important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My turn. I want to echo what I've heard a little bit in this meeting is the need for a specific focus on ESOL students this summer. So I'll be reaching out to staff to talk more about that. And I'd just like to stress that as Dr. Braybrand and his team continue to develop the plan for 5 days a week in the fall, please don't hesitate to give us an update before 1 month has passed. If you've got compelling plans to share, I think I'm probably not the only board member who would love to see them as soon as they're available. And not to say that it's not going to take some time to pull together. So with that, I will leave it there. Ms. Corbett-Sanders, you have a hand up?
No, I already had my turn. Sorry, I forgot to take it down.
No worries. Thank you. With that, we were. Thank you, everyone. It's 4:20.
Thanks, Carl. Thanks, Elaine.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the presentation.